Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the still as yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am robcasting you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. I'm coming at you from the Robservatory. This is Robservations episode number 878, coming in on that 900 episode number, coming in hot. That means we'll probably hit 1,000 by the end of the year. That's the goal anyway. How crazy is it? 1,000 episodes of Robservations. I don't know what that means. It must mean something. Anyway, there's so much going on in the world. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to say, so much to think about, so much to do. But there's this recurring question that I get thrown at me on Twitter. And I feel that when people say it to me, they're exasperated, they're usually mad, whatever. And I don't think that they truly understand that they really are asking for an answer. They're perplexed. And I feel like I feel like I owe them one. And that question is, of course, if you don't like it, why do you watch it? Well, that's actually a very good question. The way it sounds like sometimes the way I go off, usually about one certain specific TV show, of course, modern Star Trek is that show, people ask, why watch it if you don't like it? If something displeases you, why do you continue to watch it? And on one hand, I think that's a very valid question. And I also don't think it's a very valid question. And of course, as I'm wont to do, I found some articles and I thought I'd run them by you. And the first one I found, I don't know why I feel it necessary to go back into the internet to find things that I like to read that other people have written that are not my opinion. But I guess in me finding these articles, it is kind of my opinion. I honestly just want to know what other fans have thought over the years. Where were they at? Now, I found this blog. Now, I have no idea who this person is, but this was a blog. I found this irresistible. Dork Talk with Izzy. Read, watch, and discuss with me. And this was written on October 31st, 2016. So, Izzy, Dork Talk with me, read, watch, and discuss with me. I'm going to discuss what you wrote. And I hope, you don't come after me for copyright infringement because I'm giving you full credit. And this was on WordPress, Dork Talk with Izzy. And I feel that this was kind of funny. I mean, I sometimes I find things that are just tailor-made for me. Not like Tell It to My Heart tailor-made, but tailor-made. Don't watch argument and its flaws. Don't watch, or read is an argument that is used often when people can't agree on something. It's used sometimes to tell someone to stop complaining about the things they don't like. Because why are you putting so much effort into talking about something you hate? Here I will discuss some uses of said phrase and whether or not it's valid. This is a possible situation that might be able to use don't like, don't watch in a good way. Let's say two friends watch a movie together one night. One person loves it and knows there's a consistent quality to the film. The other watches half an hour and disagrees with everything. In this situation, there's no wrong person. Opinions can't all be the same. So if this happens to you, call me your little fanboy or girl heart. And now I guess you have to say, call me your little fanboy or girl heart or their heart or whichever heart. But if the one who loves the movie said to their friend, if you don't like it so far, you don't have to watch the rest. Makes enough sense. Nothing is forcing them to watch the movie he or she hates. And judging by their friend's reaction to everything so far, they can guess that since the whole movie has basically the same tone, message, themes, etc., their friend won't enjoy the rest. And yes, the reply I wrote in the paragraph above is a nicer and more detailed version of the don't like, don't watch, but that's the point. If don't like, don't watch was actually don't like, don't watch the rest in situations like these, it could be valid. Emphasis on could. This could be wrong. Now, I would just like to say, when I was a kid, we were the first people with a VCR on our block. I loved showing people movies. And when I worked in a video store beginning at age 13 in 1980, and I worked in home video stores till 1988, till I moved away from Seattle and went to college in California, I took great pride in trying to figure out my customers' tastes, especially because they came in, so people would come to me. And I would it was a point of pride for me to show people things that I thought that they would like. Sometimes I missed, but for the most part, I got to know people and their tastes over the years. And people followed me sometimes from video store, and I wound up at Silver Platters, where I was the Laserdisc. I was Laser Bob, the Laserdisc retailer and buyer for the multi-store chain. Silver Platters was at one time the largest optical disc only. There were bigger record stores, but all we sold were Laserdiscs and CDs. And we were at the time, when I was working there, the largest optical disc only retailer in the world. But I still, it was a point of pride. I would never want to make somebody watch something they didn't like. And there were some times when I would give people movies that I thought at first they might not like them, but they had to let it. You got to stick it through to see if you're going to like it. And that was something that was important to me. So, let's use the don't like, don't watch in another scenario. Someone saw the Adventure Time pilot when it aired, and he's not a fan. If someone were to use the don't like, don't watch in this case, would it make sense? Well, no, because how is he supposed to know the rest of the Adventure Time will be the same quality as the pilot? How is Sam supposed to judge the entire show by only watching one episode he didn't like? He could, but that would be an unfair judgment. Side note, it totally is, because Adventure Time becomes more awesome later on, but that's my opinion. Sometimes it sounds like users of don't like, don't watch are saying either unwatch the thing you dislike or I don't like your opinion, so stop voicing it. I agree with that. I'm not saying the first one is true in any situation. That's just how it reads sometimes to me. And the latter is most likely the way it is used most of the time. They just don't explicitly say that. When people say to me, if you don't like it, don't watch it, they're telling me that they like something and they don't appreciate me voicing my vociferous dislike of something. And I get it. I understand. Because everything is tribal now. And if I criticize a show, a lot of people think that it's a direct attack on them. What's interesting is I never attack people personally like that. I go after the writers because I blame them. But people certainly love to come back at me and make it personal. If I don't like their show, that's an attack on their identity, and they come back at me, which I find most things nowadays bemusing. I find that bemusing because I grew up always criticizing as a matter of fact, I loved film criticism back when it was really good, when film critics knew a lot about a lot of different things. So they would bring that worldwide acumen to their criticism of art and film. So I like that. We don't get that much now. Don't like, don't watch can be used as a conversation stopper. It can be used when a debate has gotten to the point where person A disagrees with person B and they can't find anything in common. Person A just says, don't like, don't watch, because person A doesn't appreciate person B's thoughts on the subject and wishes to end the discussion. It also probably won't work because people don't like to be shut up, and they're not going to stop just because you typed a few words. And another thing, how am I supposed to know if I don't like something before I even read or watch it? Let's say there was a fan fiction written about a homosexual relationship. Let's say a John Locke fanfic, just off the top of my head because I'm currently obsessed with that show, that had don't like, don't read in the description. Now, in other situations, this argument wouldn't make sense. How am I supposed to know if I enjoy your story if not from the 2 sentences you gave me that describe the plot? But when I see the don't like, don't read in this kind of scenario, I understand what it means. It's basically a shorter way of saying if you're a bigot, don't read this story, just to write hate comments about the main couple and not address my writing skills or anything that actually deserves critique. And that's too lengthy, so using a don't like, don't read gives out that message a lot quicker. This argument is a form of censorship, and censorship on the whole is a whole nother session, so I won't go into it here. Don't complain about something just for the sake of complaining about it, but do it because you actually care about the improvement of the thing you don't like, or the improvement of anything related to it. If you don't like it, then stop should be used sometimes. But then you get replies like, don't tell me what to do, so I don't know what to say. Usually, people who say don't like, don't watch are the ones voicing their popular opinions, and they don't want any negativity given to the thing that they're a fan of. But this is not always the case. Everything can get better over time. It's not an overnight change, and sometimes change may never happen. You never know what the future of something is for sure. The only thing you can do is give it a chance. But if it comes to the point where you've decided to drop a show or a book, that is entirely up to you. And if you want to continue watching or reading something you don't like, well, then that's also your choice. But I hope you have a good reason. If someone uses don't like, don't watch too much, they may resort to just accepting problems in media without addressing them. When this happens, the people who consume media and are don't like, don't watch users won't be as helpful. Without some constructive criticism, all those things you used to complain about will have a hard time improving. On a related note, there are many times when valid points are being made by an audience and the creator, writer, whoever is in charge just doesn't listen. They're stuck in their ways, and that sucks. Now, in circumstances that take place in chat rooms and the like, I don't think this phrase should be used at all. If anything, it should be replaced with, I don't like that you feel this way, but I respect your opinion. I hope we can agree to disagree. But the world will never become so polite. This post was inspired by Pie Guy's Rules video on this very subject, and I recommend you check out his video and his YouTube channel. He makes a lot of good stuff. Well, I found that, and that comes from Dork Talk with Izzy. And Izzy, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts back in 2016, and I figured I would share them again. So anyway, because if we're not sharing each other's opinions as part of the fan community, what are we doing after all? So here's the thing. I really don't like modern Star Trek. Really don't like it. You've heard me say why a million times, but I figured I'd get into some deeper reasons so newer fans might understand the context. You see, when I was watching Star Trek as a little kid, and I have to go back to 1972 when I started watching it, also the first year that there was a Star Trek convention in New York City. And I was very young. I was a very young lad, 5 years old, and I really loved Star Trek. I took it very seriously, as I do now, rightly or wrongly. And what was really interesting about Star Trek is I was obsessed even as a child. I watched it over and over and over again. I thought of it as I do today. It was a period piece about a future that will never come to pass. But that future was very real. And it seemed to me that the people making the show were really striving. It was the first time I realized that I was not watching, like when you watched Bonanza, when you're on the Ponderosa, it seemed like that was the whole world. And people would come and go, certainly. But when I was watching Star Trek, even as a kid, I was very aware that the universe was a much bigger place than we saw on one episode of Star Trek. There were other starships because we'd run across them. Sometimes they were in bad shape. Sometimes their whole crews were lost. Sometimes bad things were happening on those ships. But it created the sense, and you'd stop places like K-7 Space Station, and the Klingons would show up. So there was stuff going on, and you realized, oh, the Captain Koloth's ship was probably on adventures just like the Enterprise was, and I would think to myself, even as a little kid, I wonder what it was like to spend the last month or two on that ship. What did they do? Where'd they go? Who'd they meet? Was there the Klingon equivalent of the Doomsday Machine or the 11,000-mile-long space amoeba? And if so, what happened? Did they win? Were they defeated? Who knew? And I knew, though, that those stories were happening at the same time, because Star Trek made me believe. And then a couple things happened. In 1975, about 3 years after I started watching Star Trek, and now I was about 8, I was a big science fiction fan. I wasn't just watching Star Trek, I was watching The Twilight Zone, I was watching Outer Limits. I've been watching horror movies. I had books on the making of movies by then. This is all pre-Star Wars. And in 1975, something very interesting happened. The Franz Joseph released, and this is the first one, released this. This is my copy, by the way. This is my first edition copy from 1975. Now, what was interesting about this book is inside this little slipcase, it came with an overlay that said Star Trek, Starfleet Technical Manual. But what was really interesting was when I, as a kid, you get it, and you slide it open, and I was delighted to find this underneath. Maybe it's a little microgramma. But when you took out the thing that said Star Trek on it, suddenly, and then look at the cover. Again, I cherish this book. That's why it looks pretty much brand new. Let me get it a little closer. The Starfleet Technical Manual. And when you opened it up, it was as if it came, they even had a color grade in here for colors, Starfleet colors, official colors. They had the official Starfleet type here. They had flags and pennants, and things you hadn't necessarily seen on the show. They would anchor them. There were things like the Treaty of Peace with the Romulan Star Empire, right here. Now, I didn't understand the difference between canon and non-canon, but it showed you the actual the controls on the bridge and in the transporter room. Anything, but it did so. Here's the United Federation of Planets. Here's a schematic of the United Federation of Planets. It showed where everything was from Star Trek. But anyway, and this book was written, and everything in this book was created as if it actually came from the 23rd century. So imagine when you're a kid how this, and I read this book 1,000 times. And when this was released, it was also released at around the time when the Star Trek, the Enterprise blueprints were released, and which also not canonical, but they had the same format. So they went together as a thing. And it was utterly real. They were created in the sense they were created to be real. So if you were a fan of the show, it was supposed to be an added level of reality. I'd never seen anything like this before. And you could go to the bookstore and buy it. But for me, it was something more. It took this TV show and gave it a tangibility. And the thing is, there was so much imagination shown. The people that wrote this really watched Star Trek. They knew all about it. They had seen every episode, pored over the minutia, and then they added their own imagination and extrapolated upon what they had read and seen and heard in the episodes, and they created this. So in a way, while this is just a book, it's almost an 80th or 81st episode of the original series, if you want, because it seemed like it was a real artifact from the future. And so much thought had gone into its creation. Because of the conceit that it came from the 23rd century. Now, for an 8-year-old, it also, I mean, talk about putting coal in my imagination, lighting that fire. It was amazing. And so when I was 8 years old, I knew the episode titles by then. You know, I knew, I mean, I could tell you what episode it was from the first moments. But getting things like this made the universe much more real to me and much more serious. So, and I carried this, you know, with me when I was 8. So I had these kinds of artifacts that somebody had put a lot of thought into. And they thought to themselves, okay, in the Star Trek universe, if A, B, and C are true, then D, E, and F, and G, H, I, J, K, L, the entire alphabet also had to be true. It was all thought through. This is in 1975. The series had been off the air since 1969, and the animated series had been on in 73 and 74, the 22 episodes of the animated series. So this is post-animated series. Even that was taken into consideration. And as the years went by, there were many books. Some adopted this in a little bit. There was the insane Star Trek spaceflight chronology that came out concurrently with Star Trek the Motion Picture. And there was a lot of thought, non-canonical, put into like the timeline of where Star Trek was, because you had these 79 original episodes. Keep in mind, The Cage had never aired as an individual. There was no Cage episode of Star Trek. I mean, we knew it was made and we knew it was called The Cage, but no one had ever seen it unless you'd gone to a convention. But it wasn't considered official canon by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't until 1988 that it aired. So, to me, the canonical way to watch the first pilot of Star Trek, The Cage, is you must watch it as part of the Menagerie, which is the only 2-part episode of the original series. Then as time went by, you had people like Mike and Denise Okuda. Mike Okuda started working on Star Trek during Star Trek The Voyage Home, the 1986 version, and his lovely wife Denise was actually on the rec deck in Star Trek The Motion Picture. She doesn't like me to say that, but it's true. Their second edition of this, here's the Star Trek chronology, the history of the future. Now, if you wanted to know about the timeline of the Star Trek universe, well, look no further than this book that people that actually worked on the show created, and it's quite extensive. And, you know, again, I believe this was published in the mid-90s, so there's a lot of Star Trek that came after this. But still, if you wanted to know anything about Star Trek and its canon, it was in this book. Somebody literally wrote the book on Star Trek canon, and it's right here. Now, it needs to be updated. But if they would update it, they would have the same problem now that Star Trek Online has had. They have to incorporate modern Star Trek, which has effectively... Now, when people say, Rob, you know, why are you such a canonista? Why do you care? Well, it's like because anybody that creates a fictional universe, whether it's the Game of Thrones universe, whether it's Tolkien's universe, whether it's the Marvel or DC Comics universe, if you're investing time in these imaginative worlds, and somebody certainly, the Okudas certainly invested time in creating this chronology, because if you look at it, it's quite text heavy, and they cross-reference everything, and they go back. Somebody, in this case the Okudas, put the time and effort into compiling this book, which means that for 30 years, there's Star Trek that could take this kind of scrutiny. And certainly in my mind, for 30 years, Star Trek really could take this kind of scrutiny. And yes, there were things that didn't always match up, but people ask me. They're always like, I'm trying to provide some context here. Oh, you know, what about, you know, canon? Canon's made to be broken. Well, is it? You don't break Tolkien's canon. Nobody sits there unless you're making, well, Rings of Power. And people ask, well, what does it matter? Well, when these fictional universes have existed literally for decades before other writers came and just decided, nah, we're going to throw it all out. You know what that says to me? It says to me, it's like, you know, you couldn't, you could never cheat on math tests because you had to know how you got to the answer. You could never just write the answer down. You had to show your work. And it's out there. I understand it might be daunting, but these books exist. As a matter of fact, hey, you know what else the Akutas wrote too? Second version. This is their slipcased hardcover Star Trek encyclopedia. How many TV shows have one of these where you can just find out anything you want about the TV show? How many people, look how thick this is. This is hardcover, man. I mean, and Mike and Denise, some people might think it's crazy, but Volume 1, A to L. I mean, what's so cool is you've even got isolinear chips on the cover. This, a reference guide to the future. I mean, this is, by the way, this is out of print. But, I mean, how many TV shows have this? None. None. I mean, Steve Sansweet put out a Star Wars encyclopedia. But I'm just saying that to give you some context, and as somebody who, well, let me put this back when I'm done, as somebody who loves Star Trek for as long as I have, these books made fandom that much more fun. You know, it's like having Dungeons and Dragons books. I remember getting the Monster Manual back in, 79 or whenever that published 78. So all of this material's out there. So I would think that if anybody can take over and start making a Star Trek show, especially a show that's fit into a section of time that is well-trodden and well-documented, that wouldn't be so much a hindrance as something that you could draw upon and figure shit out. Be like, oh man, look at what TV show has all of this reference material that people have already compiled. I mean, I would think that'd be part of what's going on, but that has not turned out to be the case, which is unfortunate. Now I want to read another article. This is from Vice. Why being a hater feels so good. This is by Nikki Natividad, and it was written on August 17th, 2022, almost a year old. A psychologist explains why we like to follow shows, movies, or people we can't stand. Now, I just want to read this because I wanted to offer a counterpoint. Insightful dialogue, nuanced characters, stunning imagery. These are all things that we prize in films and shows that make for great entertainment. But we also have stuff like Emily in Paris, Sharknado, and Too Hot to Handle, which, for all intents and purposes, also make for great entertainment. Instead of watching these productions for inspiration, chances are we might be watching them to cringe. This is called hate watching, which Oxford Languages officially defines as the activity of watching for the sake of the enjoyment derived from mocking or criticizing. It's a real ongoing trend. Emily in Paris, for instance, is generally derided on social media, but is one of Netflix's most watched shows. Elizabeth watches it. Over 58 million households started watching the series in its first 28 days on the streaming platform, with the third season on the way. Turns out many of us love to hate. And with the rise of social media, this manifests in the people we follow, too. Can't get your eyes off a TikToker who pisses you off? That's hate following. There have always been mediums for this detached form of hating or hating from afar. J.R. Ilagan, a clinical psychologist based in Manila, told Vice. Manila. The hate that we're referring to here is more toward public content, public personas, and so on. Ilagan explained that hate following is a more recent development, one that brings the public personas we used to hate a little closer to home. But sometimes this can also apply to friends who, for some reason, are much more annoying online. Watching these people, like right now, watching these people could do more than just make your eyes roll. They could make you scoff, feel secondhand embarrassment, or exclaim, "Who does he think he is?" And yet, we keep scrolling for more. So why do we intentionally make ourselves feel these things? And why are hate watching and hate following so addictive? Logan said we can approach these questions through a biopsychological lens, which, as the name suggests, takes takes a look at the biological, psychological, and social factors of a certain phenomenon. Here's why we derive so much pleasure from so much cringe. Biologically, hating makes us feel good. Hate, love, and enjoyment are strong emotional responses, and sometimes when we find ourselves experiencing strong emotional responses, even in the absence of an actual threat, neurotransmitters are being secreted by our brain, Logan explained. These neurotransmitters are usually serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, famously happy hormones that promote positive feelings. This would explain why hating makes us feel good psychologically. For instance, Netflix reported a rise in popularity for reality TV shows in several countries when pandemic lockdowns were at their peak in 2020, while many people were looking for things that could give them comfort. Interesting. Well, hey, this Vice article apparently just disappeared off the internet. So anyway, there you go. Anyway, hate watching makes you feel good. I guess that's the point of that. But I don't hate watch anything for real. You know, I talked a lot about how I watched Manifest from the first episode. And I watched Manifest because I knew from the very first episode where they were going to go with this show. I could have actually told you where it ended. I told Elizabeth where the show was going to end before it ended. I knew exactly what was going to happen. I watched that show because, as I've said on this channel many times, it was a show with an impossible premise. Somebody came up with a really great, really intriguing, an airport read premise, where you read the back of a book in the airport and you're like, oh man, I got to read that. It's fantastic. And of course, with airport reads, they usually know where they're going. But with an airport read premise, or as I like to call it, an impossible premise for a TV show, they have no idea where they're going. They're going to find it on their way. I think the ultimate example of this is Lost. And of course, Lost was the show that gave birth or christened 1,000 imitators. And even Lost, by the end, I think Lost is one of the greatest audience betrayals in cinema or film history, television history, because by the end, they set up a really interesting conflict between faith and science. And then, in my mind, you know, when I was watching Lost, I thought, in my own mind, that the island, because what was the island? That's the one question that everybody wants to know. What is the island? And in my own addled brain, here's what I thought the island was. It was a thing. See, while I'm not the most religious person in the world, I love the idea of gods and monsters. So I have no problem in fiction delving into, maybe because I loved Greek and Roman myths when I was a kid, but I have no problem dealing with gods in fiction. And so I thought that the island in Lost was the last vestiges. It was God's signature on his creation of the heavens and earth, at least as far as humanity was concerned. The island was God's thumbprint in the wet clay of the earth when he created it. And if human beings found their way to that island, and they were able to, the island was a crucible. And if a human being made it across that crucible and was able to get off the island once they were there and move out back into the real world, the knowledge that they had gained is what would take humanity forward. This is what I thought in my own brain. This is not what happened on the show. But I really thought that they were going there. It seemed that they were. And then it became apparent they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. And they had no clue where they were going. Which, to me, is a mistake. It's sad, especially when a show's a hit. Same thing was true of the X-Files. You know, I remember before the first X-Files movies came out, we went to my friend Steve Melching's house and brought our Laserdiscs together and watched a lot of the Myth Arc episodes because we thought, yes, Chris Carter and company have got this whole thing figured out. They didn't. They didn't. Even when you listen to, if you get the X-Files soundtrack, there's Chris Carter's narrating an entire thing that explains the entire conspiracy away, and I'm like, I don't buy it. They didn't know. They didn't do a good job setting it up. But, you know, Star Trek I've always held it up as the ultimate example of people that have thought through their mythology, because Star Trek novelists, especially the best Star Trek novelists, when you think about people like Diane Duane, Peter David Gerald with Galactic Whirlpool, David Mack is one of my favorite modern novelists, Christopher Bennett. You know, there's so many good ones. Those Star Trek novels are really thought through. the best of the Star Trek novels, the Judith and Garfield, Reeve Stevens, two of my favorites. Again, when you read their books, especially if you delve into, if you only ever want to read one Star Trek novel and you're an original series fan, read Judith and Garfield, Reeve Stevens' Prime Directive. When you read that book, or read their Federation, if you like Next Generation, the original series, read Federation. They've spent so much time thinking about the Star Trek universe and how everything would work, that when you read the best of the Star Trek novels, just like when I bought this, or had this bought for me when I was 8 years old, the universe becomes living and breathing, and the connections that the authors make, which seem sound, are amazing. And now, again, after Star Trek the Motion Picture came out in 1979, Pocket Books, which was a division of Simon & Schuster, which now is being sold off, whatever, they took over the license from Bantam to publish original novels. And the first Star Trek novel they put out in the wake of Star Trek the Motion Picture was called The Entropy Effect. And it was written by Vonda McIntyre. Really interesting book. Really interesting. Georges Mordreau was the name of the villain, I believe. And the way Sulu is portrayed, very interesting. Really interesting stuff with starship combat. These authors put so much thought into the Star Trek universe. This was my experience of Star Trek as a franchise. How much thought was put into these novels, the best of the novels, and they dealt with everything. There were very few things that were unturned, then sequels to the episodes became annoying, but they were sequelized. You wanted to read about Khan's time on Ceti Alpha 5, you wanted to read about the eugenics wars, all of that had been covered at great length. The best look at the mirror universe was David Mack's Sorrows of Empire and Rise Like Lions. There's a 2-book banger for you if you like the mirror universe, and you wonder, why didn't any of this make it into the show? Because this is certainly a lot better thought out than, say, anything you saw in Star Trek Discovery. So for me, what I expect, especially if you have a long-running franchise, is not just to respect canon. Because it's hard, I get that. But I expect the thought, the effort, the same way your math teacher expects you to show your work. And I feel that the biggest thing about Star Trek now is the fact that since 2009, the people making Star Trek have not done the work. You know, and delving into all the work that's been done, just reading the chronology, it can't help but inspire you. It really can't, because there's so many ideas will be spawned just by reading the Okuda's chronology or delving into their encyclopedia. And when faced with the fact, I mean, it's like it's as I said, it's a fictional history. It should be immutable. It's a fictional history of a future time which will never exist, or it's a real history of a fictional future which will never exist. That's what I wanted to say. And so it gets me angry. And so why do I continue to watch things? Well, the answer to that is, 38 minutes into this show, is because I learn. I learn from something. Even if I don't like something, I mean, when I grew up going to the Seattle International Film Festival, and I would get a full series pass. And it used to be mostly in May, but in May and June, sometimes I might see 200 movies in a month. I know, right? 200 movies in a month. I'd go every day. And there were movies from all around the world. Pacific Rim movies, movies from India, movies from Russia, movies from Poland, movies from Iran, movies from Italy, movies from all around the world. A lot of those movies were not my thing. But I would watch them. Sometimes things that didn't seem like they were my thing at first turned into things that were my thing. And I was surprised by them, and I was glad I stuck with them. But I would watch anything. I sort of trained my mind. If I was bored or I wasn't that engaged, I trained my mind to learn to focus on what I was watching and really take it in, because somebody spent a long time making the movie, and I was trying to figure out why. And I really learned to appreciate things that I might not even like. And I didn't know what I was going to get. And that was sort of a philosophy that spilled out in my life to other things. That's why I'm so interested I meet all kinds of people. Some people initially I think, well, that guy's a prick. But then as you get to know somebody, you realize, perhaps I misjudged this person. They're more interesting than I would have thought. And so that's sort of a guiding principle of life, And then the philosophy my late friend Sean Fanning and I had, which was when we'd go out on a Friday, Saturday, or maybe even a Thursday night, in our 20s, mid to late 20s in LA, our guiding philosophy was whatever comes our way. We weren't in search of the greatest party. We were in search of the experience, and if the experience wasn't great, we were going to make it great, and we were pretty good at it. That was a while ago. But that's a way of life. But one of the things that I would expect is that the work is put in. And clearly, when you're watching something, Peter Jackson, when he made the Lord of the Rings movies, him and Fran and Philippa, while they might not have been as they might not have shown the kind of fealty that a lot of Tolkien fans would have wanted. Where is Tom Bombadil? But they captured the spirit of Tolkien. Because there's no way when you're making a movie that you can have song. And there's things in Tolkien Professor Tolkien wrote books. He did not write screenplays. So you have to pare it down. And we've talked about this recently, but the Scouring of the Shire, you can't make 3 movies and then have the Scouring of the Shire at the end. You can't do that. Audiences would revolt. They'd be pissed. So if you don't know what the Scouring of the Shire is, I won't tell you here, but suffice to say it would not be a satisfying ending to a 3-movie cycle. But they captured the spirit, and clearly they knew their Tolkien. So when they did something, when they changed something in the text, when they gave Legolas or Gimli different dialogue that either one of them said or somebody else said, it was still in the service and the spirit. They knew what they were doing. So, to me, why do I watch something if I don't like it? Because I'm learning. And if it's something that I've been a fan of for a long time, I'm trying to figure out, why did intelligent people that are being paid to create in a sandbox that had things like this written in 1975, when all of this is available, it's all on my shelf over there, why is it that they're not doing the work? Why aren't they putting in the time? And I'd like to read something to you, something else. I would like to read a review. Again, I found this, the movie blog. This was written by Darren. This is not John Campia's movie blog, but this was written on May 20th, 2013. And this was written to celebrate the release of Star Trek Into Darkness. And this is a review of Arena. And the thing is, I don't know who wrote this review. Maybe I know them. Maybe I've met them in real life. But this is the first time I encountered this review. And it was interesting because I just wanted to see what I could find. And I'm like, okay. So I wanted to read this review to you. This is the one and only episode of the original series that had the Gorn in it. We saw a glimpse of the Gorn in an animated episode called Time Trap. And we also saw the Gorn in the 2-parter In a Mirror Darkly from Enterprise. But never as much as we saw the Gorn in Arena. By the way, before I read this review, I want to say there are 2 things in Arena that I think are very important when it comes to Star Trek canon. Aside from the fact the first mention of the Federation and Starfleet is in Arena. But the biggest point that I think people fail to realize, and they don't think about this right away, but it's the first time that suggests that the Federation and Earth has done something wrong. At the end, they're trying to puzzle, why was the colony on Cestus 3 attacked? And obviously the Gorn are very intelligent. Subterfuge is used. And they wiped out a colony. They duped the Enterprise. They show cunning and a lot of intelligence in this episode. But at the end, Kirk postulates that, they'd never met the Gorn before. And they're in an area of space that they really don't know too much about. They follow the Gorn into a very unknown sector of space. And Kirk postulates that, you know what? We don't really know what's out here. We haven't met every species in the universe. And if they have claim to this area of space and we didn't know it, we might have been in the wrong. And the Gorn might have thought they were defending themselves. And I remember as I was watching this episode for the first time as a kid, I'm like, wow, this is an admission of wrongdoing on the part of Kirk and, speaking for the Federation, for Starfleet. That was really important. The Gorn were highly intelligent. They had technology that rivaled ours. They were smart, but they were not without compassion. Because as I've said on the show, the Gorn captain said, listen, we're in this situation. I'm going to kill you. I'm stronger than you are. I will be quick and merciful. Not so bad, right? Because the Gorn captain thought he was going to win. And then, of course, when Kirk gets the drop on him by coming up with some gunpowder and making a cannon, that's when Kirk has the realization. As soon as he's going to drive a stake, his basically makeshift knife into the Gorn's throat, killing the Gorn, he stops himself. Metron shows up and said, quality of mercy. Wow, we didn't expect that from you. Sends both captains on their way. Now, what's really interesting about that is even though it's a single glimpse of the Gorn, you can learn a lot about them from that episode. There's a lot to learn from that episode, and I would like to read this review from Darren. And let me, let's see if it's here so you can see it. So if you want to follow along at home, I want to show that it's here. And again, this was a winner, Best Pop Culture Blog at the Irish Blog Awards in 2011. That's what this blog won. Arena is a fascinating piece of Star Trek because it's such an iconic and important piece of franchise history. Despite the fact that it's far from the best the show has to offer, indeed, the basic premise of the show is a rather generic science fiction B-movie stuff. Kirk is forced to compete against a lizard-like alien by some godlike beings to ensure the survival of his crew. The script by producer Gene L. Kuhn is credited as a story written by Frederick Brown, and despite its similarities to Brown's short story of the same name, Arena also shares quite a few plot points with the 1964 episode of The Outer Limits, Fun and Games. None of this is to suggest that Kuhn was consciously channeling these sources when he wrote the teleplay. No, not like the modern people who are writing Star Trek literally ripped off Ursula K. Le Guin on purpose and then talked about it, as Alex Kurtzman did in an interview. None of this is to suggest that Kuhn was consciously channeling these sources when he wrote the teleplay, just to illustrate how generic the basic plot is. However, despite, or perhaps because of, this rather straightforward and familiar setup, Arena is a truly memorable episode of Star Trek. Like quite a few other episodes of the original Star Trek, the episode produced images and concepts that have resonated well outside of Star Trek fandom, to the point where elements like the Gorn or Kirk's highly dubious improvised weapon will be recognizable to people who have never actually seen the episode. However, the episode is also vitally important to the Star Trek franchise itself, as it offers a more thorough expansion and exploration of the backstory that has been inconsistently hinted at throughout the first season. Arena is really the first episode to feature a fully formed framework for the internal logic of the Star Trek universe, one that has informed a half-century of the franchise. Plus, Kirk wrestles a lizard man. I'm quite prone to pointing out to people working behind the scenes on Star Trek that never get enough credit. Gene Roddenberry is the creator of the show and an incredible visionary, but it's easy to overlook the skill of the people who shaped and crafted the idea into an iconic television show. I've already talked quite a bit about Dorothy Fontana, and I'll undoubtedly come back to talking about her place in the pantheon of great people who worked on Star Trek. However, let's share the love a bit here. Let's talk about Gene L. Kuhn. Kuhn died relatively young, at the age of 49. However, he made a lasting impression. His distinguished writing career included the script The Killers, Ronald Reagan's last acting job, before moving into the world of politics. When it comes to Star Trek, however, Kuhn was one of the defining influences. The writer was credited with 8 scripts under his own name and 4 more scripts under the pseudonym Lee Cronin in the 3rd season. Given the production difficulties during the 3rd season and the use of a pseudonym, it's hard to blame Kuhn for how Spock's brain turned out. Kuhn worked uncredited on a lot of other scripts during the tenure on Star Trek, much like he did working on The Wild Wild West. However, even restricting our discussion to the scripts credited to his name, it's clear that Kuhn was a massive influence in defining and shaping Star Trek. Arena is the writer's first credit for the show, and it's quite clear that as soon as Kuhn started writing for the show consistently, the mythology and the backstory of Star Trek became a lot firmer and more rigidly defined. He was responsible for turning Space Seed from a mess of a story featuring a revived Aryan gangster into a Star Trek masterpiece. For those interested in Kuhn's development of the shared universe, that episode established the eugenics wars and offered a justification for the franchise's relatively subtle distaste for transhumanism, a science fiction staple. He apparently wrote The Devil in the Dark in 4 days, which is another classic example of this pretty solid first season. He also created the Klingons in Errand of Mercy and added a bit of history to the development of faster-than-light technology in Metamorphosis. Outside of Kuhn's credited Star Trek episodes, it has also been suggested that the lead character from his aborted television show The Quester Tapes may have inspired the creation of Data in Star Trek The Next Generation. That's a fairly impressive resume if you choose to measure a writer's success by their lasting contribution to canon. More than that, though, Kuhn had a wonderful grasp of the sort of B-movie mentality that made classic Star Trek so charming, and arguably the aspect of the show most sorely missing from the misguided attempt to imitate the original series during the first couple of years of The Next Generation. Kuhn is, after all, the writer who gave us the Gorn, a species with remarkable pop culture awareness given their next on-screen appearance would occur in A Mirror Darkly in 2005. Well, he forgot Time Trap, but that's okay. It's only a quick one. He's also responsible for both the Space Romans in Bread and Circuses, co-written with Roddenberry, and the Space Gangsters in A Piece of the Action. And even the third season, writing under a pseudonym, Kuhn gave us the wonderfully eerie space western vibe of Spectre of the Gun and the cautionary space racism morality tale of Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Apparently, Kuhn wrote Arena without realizing that he was drawing on Frederick Brown's short story. As discussed in Great Birds of the Galaxy, according to the on-air credits, the script for Arena was based on the Frederick Brown short story of the same name. What happened, says Dorothy Fontana, is that Gene wrote the script as an original. When it was read by Research, they said, "Oh, this is very much like the Frederick Brown short story." Gene says, "Yes, you're right. I must have read it and just didn't realize it." So he instantly gave story credit to Frederick Brown, and Mr. Brown was properly paid. Gene Kuhn wasn't even ripping off the story, but it was so similar that he said, "Yeah, you're probably right," because he read a lot of Science Fiction Digest science fiction, that they gave the man credit on the episode, unlike modern Star Trek that did not give Ursula K. Le Guin credit for those who walk away from Umlaus, even though the showrunner Alex Kurtzman said, "Yes, we were heavily influenced by the story." Oh, how times have changed in the making of Star Trek. It's a nice story, and based on Kuhn's delightfully pulpy aesthetic, it's not too hard to believe that he'd stumbled across the idea of Kirk fighting an alien to the death without realizing that he was drawing on a short story from 1944. Despite the somewhat basic premise and setup, there's a lot to like here. The Gorn, for example, is an absolutely wonderful creation. It's one of the few Star Trek aliens that wouldn't look out of place in a schlock horror film. It's very, very clearly just a guy in a suit, but the upfront absurdity of it all is hard to resist. We are discussing space dinosaurs who can fly spacecraft while wearing loincloth. It's hard to ignore the B-movie appeal of that image, and it's probably a reason why the Gorn have become such an iconic alien, despite appearing only once during the entire original Star Trek run. Okay, and briefly in an episode of Star Trek The Animated Series, he does mention it. Still, the Gorn stand among the most distinctive and recognizable of the classic Star Trek aliens, to the point where a trailer for the 2013 Star Trek game even features an affectionate reunion of William Shatner and the Gorn. Now, I'd like to point out here that during this time, in the 60s, on television budgets, it was incredibly hard. There was no CG. And the design of the Gorn, the face and all that, is actually incredibly well done. And in color, too. And if you look at the Outer Limits that had almost a monster every week, these were staples of that time, and they were taken very seriously. The audiences of the day accepted, remember, they shot the Gorn in bright sunlight, at Vasquez Rocks. They weren't hiding it in shadow. They weren't hiding it in the dark. It was brightly lit up for all to see. They were proud of that Gorn. And the episode, the story, is definitely the reason why. So, the Gorn have featured quite heavily in spin-off media, with the Gorn Crisis. Again, the Gorn Crisis, there's Gorn stuff out there. The Gorn Crisis, exploring the obviously pressing question of what the Gorn were doing during the Dominion War at the end of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. They've played a crucial part in the expanded universe as part of the Typhon Pact series of novels by Pocket Books. They feature heavily in one of the Star Trek video games, the Starfleet Universe strategy games. They've even cameoed in a scene cut from the 2009 Star Trek reboot. Not bad at all, eh? Of course, the fight itself is part of pop culture history, and even the filming location has become a piece of pop culture geography, with Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back celebrating the use of the same location by setting a scene at the Arena Diner. In Galaxy Quest, the script can incorporate a shout-out to Arena without even naming the episode. When the movie's Shatner-esque lead finds himself confronting a monster in the desert locale, the only member of the team to have watched the show offers sage advice. Look around. Can you form some sort of a rudimentary lathe? The lathe itself has become the subject of a Mythbusters episode. And despite the fact that the villain is an extra wandering around in a lizard suit, Arena still manages to stay true to Roddenberry's Star Trek ideals by allowing Kirk to refuse to kill his defeated opponent, and by making it clear that the Gorn is not a monster. Kuhn's script is careful to justify the Gorn aggression, rather than presenting the creature as a mindless brute. While massacring an entire colony without warning is hardly a civilized act, Arena does offer some excuse for the atrocity, with McCoy observing, "Then we could be in the wrong." That said, the massacre of innocent colonists without any warning or prior contact is hard to justify no matter what external factors are at play. It seems like Kirk and McCoy are too easy to forgive the brutal attack made on the base that welcomed the Gorn ship with open arms. Still, it's nice that Arena makes some effort, however small, to humanize the Gorn and to clarify that they aren't mindless killing machines. This would become something of a specialty for Kuhn, with the Devil in the Dark revolving around the revelation that the Horta is not, despite its appearance, a monster. Now that's all I'm going to read about that. But people say, Rob, in the season finale of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Pike says sometimes a monster is just a monster, which is the antithesis of what Star Trek, the original series, was about. And one of the reasons that I find myself not liking something is because, again, it seems that the writers and the creators of the show, which, by the way, has now a 57-year history, the creators of Strange New Worlds, have just willy-nilly decided to cherry-pick things on the most superficial and rudimentary level. Now, as a Star Trek fan since 1972, I watch modern Star Trek, even though I can't stand it, to learn. I watch it to learn. I watch it to understand how not to handle a fictional universe. I watch it to understand what not to do when given the reins of a franchise. And I'm surprised that a show such as Strange New Worlds bends over backwards to, rather than create new characters, take all the characters that were created by others and repurpose them. There's not even an effort, and when they do, and now here's another thing. You take the character of Lon Noonien Singh. Christina Chong is a beautiful woman, and I think she's a great actress. But they've created a character, a descendant of Khan Noonien Singh. First of all, someone's got to write a monograph, or someone's got to write the definitive essay about how Khan Noonien Singh is probably the most misunderstood character in pop culture history, because no one who's worked on Star Trek since 2009 has ever really bothered to delve into his history, because they keep getting Khan wrong. Everyone thinks that Khan was this megalomaniacal, evil villain. And they keep playing that card. Of course, Lon, 300 years later, apparently Khan was so evil that people still take her to task, or she's shunned for being a relative of Khan Noonien Singh's. Well, first of all, the fact that Khan had any relatives that lived on Earth is also dumb. Everybody should have gone back and seen the kind of... See, this is the kind of thing I expect from Star Trek. Even people that are creating a spin-off product have spent far more time thinking about the Star Trek universe and extrapolating upon it than any of the writing staff of modern Star Trek. And that's what's annoying. There's all this material out there. They haven't done the work. They haven't done the work. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why haven't you done the work? You've got all this material that's out there. But the idea is, so here's the thing. So Star Trek postulates, and by the way, if you ever wanted to know when all this stuff happens, pick up the Star Trek chronology, because Mike and Denise Akuta know when it happens. You know, the writers of modern Star Trek, they would just rather not deal. They want to be like, oh, no, this is an actual prequel to Star Trek. But any of this, they don't want to have to deal with it at all. Which is like, well, why not? If your show's supposed to be a prequel to the original series, why you're trying to have your cake and eat it too? You want to make up your own stupid shit that's not nearly as thought through as it's been thought through over the last 57 years, and then you want me to believe it. This is another reason that I get so angry about things. Why are you gaslighting me? Why are you gaslighting a lot of the fan base? And man, I mean, I'm telling you, not a day goes by where I don't get my, okay, boomer. Okay, I'm not even a boomer. It's like even the people that use the insult, okay, boomer, haven't even taken the time to understand what a boomer even is. Now, I don't really care that people insult me online, but it's just another indication of really people are kind of not doing the work. Like if you're going to call somebody a boomer, like you can find out how old I am, and you can look up what is a boomer. And within 2 keystrokes on your keyboard, you can find out the answer. And I guess if you still want to call me a boomer, but when someone just writes okay boomer as an insult, 1, it makes you look dumb, and 2, you're wrong. So you've struck out twice. And I understand you're on Twitter, so what does it matter? But it's also indicative of the entire writing staff of modern Star Trek since 2009. They haven't done the work. And it's out there. And in doing so, they're diminishing all of the great imaginative work that all the way back to 1975, who would have thought somebody would have made this? This, again, shows more wit, more intelligence, and more thought than all of the Star Trek that's been written since 2009. And it's not the biggest book in the world. A lot of thought went into this, though. A lot more thought than... So, Khan Noonien Singh, as they tell us in Space Seed, he was basically a benevolent dictator. He wasn't massacring people. Nobody was hurt. And they explain that the genetically engineered Superman, it was the scientists who forgot that superior ability breeds superior ambition. And the genetic Superman who sees power across the world, they squabbled amongst themselves because they wanted to be the best. Each one wanted to be the best. And Khan was, as Kirk said, the best of the tyrants. And Spock can't understand why McCoy and Scotty and Kirk they admire him. They admire him. Because he wasn't awful. He wasn't a despot. He wasn't killing people. He didn't put people in concentration camps. We offered the world order. I mean, no one likes dictator, but there was no final solution under his rule. He wasn't a bad guy, apparently. I mean, yeah, superior ability breeds superior ambition, and he was driven by the idea that he probably could have made the world a better place. And who knows, if there weren't so many genetically engineered Supermen that were vying to do the same thing, he might have. We don't know. But when Kirk abandoned him to SETI Alpha 5 at the end of the first season episode Space Seed, as Khan tells us, he never bothered to check on our progress. SETI Alpha 6 exploded 6 months after they were left on that planet. No one shows up until 15 years later. Most of Khan's people were dead, including his wife, and they could barely eke out an existence on a once rich, verdant planet that had been turned into a desert. I'd be pissed too. Remember, the original title of Star Trek II was not The Wrath of Khan. It was Star Trek II, The Vengeance of Khan, which might have made a better title. Do you know why they changed it? Because Lucasfilm, George Lucas, asked Paramount to change it because the original title of Jedi was not Return of the Jedi, it was Revenge of the Jedi. So Star Trek II changed its title, which was kind of a mistake because Vengeance of Khan, and we all know it as Wrath of Khan, but Star Trek II, The Vengeance of Khan, I think was actually a better title. And Wrath of Khan's good, but Wrath is different than Vengeance. And Vengeance better described what Khan's problem was. But so here's the thing. With Star Trek Strange New Worlds, they decided, because Akiva Goldsman came up, I'm sure it was an Akiva Goldsman idea. It's just a dumb idea. Because here's the thing. Any writer worth their salt who's creating backstory for a fictional universe, if one thing is true, if A, B, and C are true, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, they all have to be true. And the idea that La Noonien Singh is a descendant of Khan from 300 years ago, I don't know if her genetic engineering, again, it makes no sense. Khan and his followers that were remaining fled the earth. And if he had a son, what, he didn't take him with him? And if he did have a son, he probably would have been killed as a product of genetic engineering, because I'll bet your bottom dollar that Khan did not procreate with a regular human. Although he might have. But you know what? Marlon MacGyver's was there on the Enterprise, so that's not an indication that Khan didn't procreate with another genetically engineered super person. But it also doesn't make sense. And it also puts way too much importance back on why does everything have to be about Wrath of Khan? Why? Because the writers of modern Star Trek have no imagination. They look at the thing that everybody, the one thing. And you know what it says to me? It says to me, again, you haven't done the research. I mean, even Nicholas Meyer, when he was given the chance to work on Star Trek back in the day, Nicholas Meyer doesn't even have a writing credit on Star Trek 2. Jack Sowards does. But when he wrote the script, he went back and delved into Star Trek episodes and read a lot of Horatio Hornblower, and that's why it's so nautical. But here's the thing. I watch because I need to understand how a franchise like Star Trek can be so mismanaged. Now, again, why did I read this article about the Gorn and Arena? Because the thing is, what I don't understand, I'll ask you all a question if you watch Strange New Worlds. So they decided to have the Gorn implant their eggs in human hosts, or I guess in any host. Warm-blooded hosts, even though lizards are cold-blooded animals. How does that work necessarily? Don't know. First of all, that birth method is clearly, again, stolen from another movie that, apparently everybody that writes modern science fiction, because they worked on The Magicians or the Carrie Diaries or whatever, have all seen the same classic 10 science fiction movies. And clearly, Alien and Aliens, they've seen Star Trek 2, they've probably seen the Star Wars movies. You can name them on maybe 10 fingers. But it's so disappointing when somebody looks at a race like the Gorn and they're like, okay, somehow our youth, their eggs, we're going to implant eggs in these colonists and they're born within a couple of days. That's another conceit from Alien, that the life cycle is so sped up. But now here's the thing. When you watch the final episode of Hegemony, and the word is hegemony, when you watch that final episode, do the Gorn, once I guess they're putting their eggs in people, do they not keep track of the people? And then when the alien children are born, the Gorn babies are born, they just let them run amok? Like, when do they gather them up and put them into school and teach them how to become part of a spacefaring civilization? How to use computers and technology? How does that work? Or do they just let them run around? So when I watch these shows, I think to myself, where is the actual thought process put into how does the Gorn civilization work? According to Pike, which is the antithesis of Star Trek, sometimes a monster is just a monster. Tell me you don't understand Star Trek. You know how it is. It's frustrating to watch. There's so much rich science fiction out there. Where is the Gene Coon of modern Star Trek? Henry Alonso Myers is not him. And, I'll call him out because Henry Alonso Myers, actually, I don't have to call him out. Let's go read some of what Henry Alonso Myers had to say. Because why not? Why not see what he had to say? There was an interview that Henry Alonso Myers gave about this episode of Hegemony. So here's what Vulture asks. The 2-season finale is such a cliffhanger. The season 2 finale is such a cliffhanger. Would you have ended the season that way if you'd known a strike would delay season 3 by a lot? The entire intent of doing this episode, that way was that we were thinking about the great Next Generation two-parter, The Best of Both Worlds. It's a fantastic end of the season, and it shocks the hell out of you. Like, I have to wait until next season to see the next part? That's all we were trying to do. It was just, let's surprise everyone, and let's have this be a best of both worlds. Let's hold ourselves up to that level. We wanted people to be shocked and delighted because I remember experiencing that when I was younger and being blown away and loving it. I give you Henry Alonzo Myers, who wants to do a riff on a previous Star Trek episode. Not write something new or original. Not do something groundbreaking. Let's go back to 1990 and emulate that, but emulate it badly. Because if you remember in the episode The Best of Both Worlds, there was a lot going on. Riker hadn't accepted a command. So Riker kept turning down commands, and Picard says, "Why are you still here, Will?" Then, of course, you have Shelby, a young up-and-coming officer who's definitely got her sights set on the Enterprise. She's expecting Riker will take off, you know? And she even tells Riker in the episode, "You're in my way." So while you have the whole Borg threat, there's a lot of high drama. If you took the Borg out of that episode, you could have made that episode about Shelby coming on to the Enterprise and offering an alternative to Riker and offering a pretty good example of who a different kind of a show, certainly. But there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. What do we get in Hegemony? Spock still crying over Christine Chapel. I mean, we even get Christine Chapel. It's the best of both worlds. They wish. And of course, at the end of Best of Both Worlds, Part 1, that other story that's happening, Riker has stepped up to command. He has taken the center seat. And he literally might have to kill his captain in order to keep it. So the human drama of what's going on in Best of Both Worlds is not just the Borg coming and taking Patrick Stewart and turning him into Locutus. No, it's not just that. There's actual real pathos and a real story being told there about our secondary characters. And in Hegemony, they couldn't wait to introduce Mr. Scotty. They couldn't wait to have. I wish it was like Best of Both Worlds. And when Henry Alonzo Myers gives an interview like this, I'm like, bro, first of all, did you give any thought at all to the Gorn as a race? Did anybody sit down and say, okay, we need to figure out who and what the Gorn are? What are they? How do they work? Like, we see they're young running around. I don't know, they're just born. They just exploded out of their human host because apparently they can grow in any biological entity that they find. It doesn't matter. La'an talked about birthing pens. Where did they come up with that? Obviously, they came up with it in Aliens. But okay, now how do you go from those feral, monstrous youth to, do they go to school? Because they must. I mean, what kind of school? There's clearly no thought put into the journey from those creatures to the spacefaring race that's posing a threat to Starfleet. And also, remember, at the beginning of that episode, they already destroyed a starship, and the Gorn's like, don't. They've already declared war on that. It's done. They've killed a bunch of Starfleet officers, and they've attacked a planet. I mean, and we're like, don't stay behind the line. Really? I mean, you've already killed our people. You've already declared war on us. And this wasn't even part of Federation space. We're helping out it's a colony world that's outside, and the Gorn just draw a line because that was brought up in the original arena. None of it was thought through. So if it's not thought through and you can see it wasn't thought through in the episode, why am I supposed to like it? I don't know. I have to learn. I have to watch it. I watch it not to hate it. I watch it to understand how not to write like it. I watch things that aren't good and I learn from them. What I don't understand is with all of this material, whether it's the encyclopedia, whether it's this, I just wish that I really felt that somebody who worked on modern Star Trek since 2009 delved into any of this stuff, because this is just a resource. It's just a resource. It exists. Go find this stuff. This is a compilation of what's already been done by writers that are fucking better than you. And I want to know why, when you're given the keys to the kingdom, why this is all you can come up with? Amalgamations of aliens, amalgamations of a bunch of other things that aren't Star Trek. Why not come up with things that are? It's out there. You can find them. Maybe try watching an episode. Don't just go watch Arena and laugh at the suit, because back in 1966, it was pretty fucking cool. But if you're going to come up with an alien species, here's a pro tip for all you writers. And I've talked about this a lot on this show. If you're going to write, I don't care if you're writing the Cenobites. I don't care if you're writing the Gorn. I don't care what you're writing. Understand whatever aliens or creatures you're coming up with. You need to understand them before you can write them well. Because if you don't understand them, it's all willy-nilly. It doesn't matter. There's no way for an audience to really get involved. And I understand. I get a lot of people like modern Star Trek, but a lot of people have, they haven't delved into a lot of things. And I don't begrudge anybody who likes that stuff. But here's the thing. Just demand more. The reason that I watch and I continue to watch when I don't like Star Trek is because I've been watching it my whole life. I want Star Trek to get better. Star Trek used to be relevant. People can tell you episodes of the original series and the episodes of Deep Space Nine, or even Voyager, or even TNG. Everybody's got favorite episodes they can tell you that resonate with them for whatever reason. They're speaking about basic human truths. Anyway, I belabored the point, but the question that I wanted to answer is, why do you watch it if you don't like it? The simple answer is to learn how not to do that, to learn how to be better in my own work. And then people throw, well, if you think you can do better, go ahead and do better. I've never worked in television at that level. I directed 5 episodes of Femme Fatales for Cinemax and HBO. I'm an HBO approved director. Those episodes were done for 6 figures over the course of 3 days. I've never worked in television at that level. I certainly can do it, but I've just never had the opportunity, so nobody could bank on me anyway. So, to be clear, I've never been up for a position on Star Trek. I've never come close to a position on Star Trek. I've never even, other than working on the franchise as a documentarian, as a paid consultant, and as somebody who worked for 2 years on Star Trek The Experience, I've never had any opportunity to work on Star Trek because I'm not qualified to do so. And people ask me what I have done. Hey, you can watch what I've done. We made Tango Shalom for 90%. 90% less than one episode of Strange New Worlds cost. 90% less. So do that math in your head. So there you go. But anyway, that's why I watch. I watch to learn what not to do. I watch to learn how to be better. And I watch to learn how people are spending money on something that should, could, and hopefully will be better in the future, because I long to see the day when Star Trek Discovery is gone, but Star Trek Strange New Worlds, maybe it'll get better. But this idea, where it's at now, it's too bad. There's a lot of things. You guys are firing in so many super chats that I'm going to get to that, and I have a lot of letters I'm going to read. I'm just going to keep going. It's going to be a long one tonight. Why not? I'm feeling salty. Let's go. Let me see where everybody is at. And again, super chats. The tip feature 2 is open. The tip link, because people send in tips. I just see one from Darth Plato. Let me just go back. You can send tips or super chats. Let me just get to the beginning. The Memes of Destruction says, by the way, the tip link is in the description of the episode. The Memes of Destruction says, no one would ever seek outrage on the internet. I know, right? I try and temper it, though. I try and keep it light. Keep it light. Eddie from outer space says, hey, I started watching and having interest with Star Trek 09. I love TOS, TNG, and Deep Space Nine. The rest isn't my cup of tea. Picard Season 3, though, it has its problems, but oh, man. Hey, look. The people that made Star Trek Season 3 under the watchful eye of showrunner Terry Matalas, did a fantastic job. And look, you know what's really great about the people that made... Now, is Star Trek Picard Season 3 perfect? No, because they had to deal with the fact that Star Trek Picard Seasons 1 and 2 happened. If they didn't have that, it would have been different. And, you know, if I had one criticism of the show, I would like to have seen how the Borg and the Changelings got together. That would have been more, I would love to have seen that backstory delved into. You had two bad bitches that had reasons to get together and fuck up the Federation. I would like to have seen that happen. But anyway, I get it. Chemist says, Rob just casually dropping that he's been curating cinema taste since before I was born. Laugh out loud. We're eating good tonight, gents. Enjoy. Well, what does that mean, curating cinema tastes? I'm just saying that I was trying to find good things for people to watch. I mean, that was literally my job. I had to give people things that they could rent or buy that they enjoyed. And I liked it better if people liked things than if they didn't. So, I don't know, is that a bad thing? I mean, if you worked in a video store, especially, this is pre-Blockbuster. So, that's how I had my reputation. Kellraiser says, turn it around on them. If you know I don't like something and that I will complain about it, then why are you reading or watching my review on it? It's true, but I don't like to go after people that way. I mean, I think that's actually a great point. I try and be nice. I try and keep to criticizing the show or criticizing what it is I don't like. But all of these people are very quick to criticize me. You know, it's very funny. There was somebody who threw me the old Simpsons meme, thinking, and it was really interesting. They said something about me being a grandpa, but you know, in their Twitter bio, it was all talking about how they're allies of everybody. You know, I'm allies of trans people, LGBTQ, all the different things that you would expect, and yet they can go after me and call me grandpa or call me old man yelling at clouds. I mean, it's okay to come after. It's very funny that the performance activists on social media, they're very protective of certain kinds of people, but then they're also very quick to go out. There's some kinds of people that are okay to sacrifice, you know, and that, I imagine when the pitchforks finally do come out and society falls, we'll see where that performance activism takes them. But yeah, because it's all disingenuous. So, but it's all very funny. Scott Bartholomew says, if fans do not critique and make their opinions about each iteration of Trek known en masse, then nothing will ever change or improve. I watch it because I'm devoted to it, the good and the bad. Yeah, I agree. I mean, how do you know, I watch lots of movies that I don't think are great. And you learn from everything. I've read books that I hope will be good that aren't as good as I'd hoped. But, you know, you learn from the good and the bad. To only watch... I mean, look, we now live in a world where people will not listen to others they disagree with. Oh, I don't agree with them. They must be deplatformed, or I don't like what they say. And I'm like, you know what? If there's somebody who says something that you don't like, you got to be able to understand what they've said, and so you can fight back. So you can understand with what it is that they've said that, you know, you might not agree with, and you have to understand how to combat what they've said with your own thoughts. And cogent discourse is always a great thing. And, you know, I used to love, like, I never took high school debate, but I had friends who did, and I would love to watch debates when I knew my friends were debating a position that they didn't agree with. They had to take the other side and try and win the debate. There's nothing better to learn how ideas are put forth than doing something like that. Chemist says, I just came. I need those now, please. I don't know what you're referring to there, Chemist, but whatever you need. I've got it. Duke Devil 95 says, good evening, Mr. Burnett, from another Mr. Burnett. Weird coincidence tonight. My friends and I are streaming tomorrow about why canon matters. I'm arguing the Trek side, and I actually bought that encyclopedia tonight on eBay. It's a great book. It's hard to find, but it's definitely worth getting. 200 Watt Studio says, I just finished watching Babylon 5, The Road Home. That's the new animated Babylon 5 series that just dropped. Not series, pardon me, movie. and you can get it's on 4K. You can get it. Tears in My Eyes several times. That's how you go back to a loved series and how you leave hope for the future. Well, Straczynski himself did it and got the remaining people that were alive to voice it. So I have high hopes. Can't wait. I'm glad to hear that. I respect your taste, with one exception. That's good. That's good to know. Gunslinger 13 sends in or Gunslinger 19 sends in a tip and says, "Hey, Rob, hope you're good. Would you like Mike Flanagan to make a TV adaptation of Stephen King's The Dark Tower books? They're my favorite. Cheers." Sure, I think Flanagan could do a great job. You know, I like Dr. Sleep, and I've really liked a lot of his output on Netflix. I hope it's good. I can't wait to see House of Usher. Chemist says, "I have a Gorn 2259 sex doll. Don't judge me." Come on, Chemist. On this channel, we talk about alien sex a lot. Never judge you here. Non-judgmental. Scott Bartholomew says, "The fans who grew up embracing TOS in the 60s and 70s will be the salvation of the franchise." Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, it's you know, as we get older, people seem to know less and less and less. I don't know. I mean, I would hope that we know more and more and more, but I guess we do. I mean to say that the people that could hire us are the people, they know less and less and less. And it's unfortunate. Institutional knowledge. But the thing is, it's not enough to know Star Trek. You also have to know how to work in Hollywood. You have to know how to work in a writer's room. You have to know how to be a TV showrunner. And that's a lot of knowledge. And if you don't have that, that's problematic. The thing about Terry Matalas, what's really interesting about Terry Matalas in Star Trek Picard Season 3, and I've told everyone, his crack writing staff, they got to really know each other writing 12 Monkeys, all 4 seasons of 12 Monkeys. And if you want to see how a great time travel story is handled, I understand that 12 Monkeys is an adaptation of the Terry Gilliam film, which is an adaptation of Chris Marker's La Jetée. But if you watch what Terry did and his writing staff did, 12 Monkeys, in terms of a time travel story, works with clockwork precision. And you can see where they were coming from. And they didn't have a lot of time to put together Picard Season 3. So he was lucky to work with those people. And they really know how to make science fiction. Word Balloon, John Suntress. If you don't listen to the Word Balloon podcast, why don't you go to the Word Balloon podcast? John Suntress says, "Kids love New Trek because of the LGBTQ representation and strong women, but ignore the dumb sci-fi stories, lack of Trek knowledge, and dismiss 60s through 90s Trek." You know, I would say that is true. I think it's not so much just LGBTQ and representation, and there's no reason. I don't mind that at all. As a matter of fact, I find the one thing that I think that the 60s Star Trek doesn't have that we should have in modern Star Trek is what is the evolution of humanity going to look like in the 23rd century. That's another thing that's really disappointing. The Star Trek of Strange New Worlds is really similar to people of today. They talk like people of today, and it's disappointing. And I think that the human animal, especially look at the depiction of the 31st century in Discovery, my God, talk about unimaginative. Where would humanity go in the 31st century? What about transhumanism? You know, when human beings are mating with people on different planets, human sexuality would not be so earthbound. I mean, it's too bad. Remember, you know, it was kind of a stealth concept, but Spock's mother having a half human, half Vulcan character, which means, I mean, they never dealt with this canonically, but they dealt with it in a lot of books, that there was a lot of medical, they had to accentuate the birth process medically to make it work, to have a Vulcan-human hybrid, even though Enterprise dealt with that as well. But back in the original series, that was not something that was, you know, happening with ease. But when it comes to sexuality, I find Star Trek's, in the future, let's see sexuality depicted in a science fiction way. That's why the Trill were a great way to delve into those ideas. They first did that in The Host with Odan and Beverly Crusher. When Odan comes back as a woman, its male host dies, and now Odan has a female host, and Odan still loves Beverly. Beverly has to come to grips with the fact that, look, without saying it, I'm a straight woman, but the audience knew what was going on because you're watching two women and O'Dan saying, we can still love one another. If you get into the 23rd century, human sexuality is going to be far more evolved than it is today. And it's going to be par for the course because now we're involved with aliens, interspecies relationships. You know, what if you got involved in like a flocks thing happening there? What's going on with human beings in that situation? I mean, it's too bad. That I think the representation of that, the representation when you're talking about pronouns in the 31st century, nothing will date a Star Trek show faster than that. Especially when we've already seen episodes with the trill and all of that. It's really unfortunate, but I understand that's why people today, because everybody wants to see themselves reflected back at them. That's something I think that's modern audiences want. That was I didn't grow up with that. But people would say, well, Rob, that's because you always saw yourself represented in all the... I don't know, did I? When I was looking at Captain Kirk, I saw somebody I wanted to become. Maybe. Or somebody I wished I could become. Not somebody I already was. Well, that's because he was a white cis male, Rob. You just didn't understand. Perhaps. I understand what you're saying, but, you know. Eddie from Outer Space says, the shame is not only that they don't get Khan, they also don't get the charm of Ricardo Montalban. I mean, what the fuck were they thinking when casting Cumberbund? Well, that's another thing. They're not thinking, and it's frustrating. Charles Davis Atkins says, positive toxicity exists. It's fair to criticize when Strange New Worlds and Discovery's chain of command is so different from Star Trek Enterprise to TOS. Reviews in the 90s and 2000s, there seemed to be rules, but now certain shows get handicaps. Well, I would say this. That's another thing. You've got to... Shows like The Expanse or Battlestar Galactica make you believe. You know, they make you believe in the chain of command. These shows all have to have a chain of command. And I'll tell you something. I understand what they were going for at the end of Hegemony by having Pike look like he's in a bad situation. But you know what? If you're going to leave it on that cliffhanger, give the audience something. That wasn't just a cliffhanger. That was showing your indecisive captain at a crossroads where he looked incompetent. Why'd you got to do that to Anson Mount? You know, it's Star Trek after all. And I mean, maybe that's the writer's room. They didn't know what to write for him at that moment. I'd like to say that the end of Hegemony, people would say, well, Rob, you know, it's just like, I mean, no, you know what it was? It was the writers not knowing what to put in his mouth. Henry Alonzo Myers wrote that episode, and Henry Alonzo Myers didn't know what to write. And he's like, we wanted it to be like Best of Both Worlds Part 1. Really? Well, did you hear Ron Jones's score that was dun 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 dun, and it brings on fire? Did we get that from you? How come you didn't give Pike a line? You're the writer. You're the one that, you know, you want more money. You don't give your principal cast member, the captain of your ship, the man who wears the apron in the family, you didn't give him a final line in that episode? That's not Best of Both Worlds. That's what you left fans with for like a year. Nothing? Uh-oh, the situation is dire and everything's grim. Not a good look. Not a good look for your cast, but okay. Duke Devil 95 says, this Arena article highlights one of the many problems with current Trek, the ignorance of lore and canon. Strange New Worlds has improperly turned the Gorn into xenomorphs. Ignore the lore, lose the true fans. I would say ignore the lore. The thing is, it's not just because the Gorn were not that developed. What you gave us was a ripoff of other. When you're ripping off something, make it not so obvious. Everyone's like, oh, everyone's calling the Gorn, they're xenomorphs now. You know, it's so lame that modern writers, they haven't seen shit and they haven't read shit. They haven't read any science fiction. There's nothing unique and interesting. Go into nature. Go read a nature book. And I understand, well, there's bees and, you know, wasps are taken over by this parasitic. I get all that. I understand that there are those things. But you've got to explain to me, and I bet they can't, how does the Gorn civilization work? You know? The Gorn have these giant, how do they build? Where do they build those? Do they have shipyards? Is there a Utopia Planitia of the Gorn race? How do they deal with how do they manage their kids? Do they just let their kids run rampant when they're newly born Gorn? Just how do the newly born go from those things into commanding starships that are very formidable? How do they figure out what their territory is? Do they colonize planets, or do they just kill everybody they find on those planets? They haven't done a good job. I mean, when you first meet the Klingons, look at Errand of Mercy and look at how the Klingon civilization is developed. Because in addition, there's always an interesting, in original Star Trek, you've got the planet Organia. Then the Klingon threat shows up on the planet of Organia. And you've got the Organians are dealing with that. Then you got the Klingons. Then you got Kirk undercover with the Klingons. There's all this stuff going on. At the same time, it's all world building. They don't know how to do that anymore. They don't know how to write good science fiction because they haven't read good science fiction, and all they've ever done is watched like the same 10 science fiction movies, which is a bummer. Chemist says, "Love you, Tom. Don't give up on me." That's true. Don't give up on anyone. Son of John says, "I respect you, Rob, because you're like the Alabama dock worker trying to ask Alex and Akiva to get it right, but they don't." We're here for you, Rob. Running, swimming to stand by you. That guy who jumped in the water to stand up and get in the fray, he's the hero of the year, I think. The hero of the year. Our friend Darth Plato sends in a tip and says, if you don't like it, then why watch it? This is a passive-aggressive retort. A simple answer could be, it's a roast. Enjoy the stream. If you don't like my stream, then don't watch it. It's also a critique of art, which is fair game. Totally agree. Chemist says, just having my fun, Tom. My apologies. I meant no offense, sir. I just enjoy busting your balls and listening to the R&B drop knowledge bombs. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know who you're saying. Oh, who's Tom? Is that Tom from Midnight's Edge, Tom? Or is that my beloved Tom Jr. Jackson, the greatest moderator who ever lived? Irene Jobson is here and says, I want someone to talk about the correlation between Star Trek, Wrath of Khan, and Guardians of the Galaxy 2, the ego story. Is there one? I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, that's more of a father and son thing, really, which is sort of, I'd have to think about that for a while. I don't necessarily know, I'd have to think about that before I delve into that. Now I'm going to read a letter because I've got some great letters. And I'm going to go back and read some. So for those of you who don't know, I read letters on the show. And you can send letters to me right down below where it says postgeeksingularity.com. Watch it right there. So let's start. Let's start with July 2023 Trek sales. I don't know. Oh, yeah, this is a weird letter. I have to go back to that and do that again. How to save Star Trek. Bill Quigley says, how to save Star Trek. Do a Star Trek TV show that covers the rest of the 5-year mission of the original Enterprise crew, and then do TV shows about the original Enterprise crew members from the end of the 5-year mission until Star Trek the Motion Picture. Bill, I appreciate that and understand where you're coming from, but I have to disagree. Stay away from that era. The true way to move forward with Star Trek was already shown to us by Gene Roddenberry himself. Jump 100 years ahead and give us a new crew, a new mission, new ships, new galactic civilizations. Give us something new that we haven't seen before. To go back since 2009. I mean, here's something weird. Okay. So Star Trek aired from 66 to 69. A decade later, we got Star Trek the Motion Picture that takes place 5 years later after the end of the original series. So there's time, and the canonically the show has moved forward. The Star Trek universe has moved forward. And then if you go beyond that, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan takes place, 10 years later? Because he hasn't seen Khan in 15 years? So you're moving forward. And then by the time you get to Next Generation, it's the better part of 100 years later. You're constantly moving forward, which allows you to be unfettered from canon. It's not like, oh, we're going to create the spore drive and all this technology that predated the original series, but we've never heard of it before, and Spock has a sister and all that. Why do that to yourselves? Follow what Roddenberry talked to you about. From 1966 to when Voyager started in 1995, went off the air in, 2001, and you're constantly moving the universe forward. Enterprise was sort of a step backwards, but back hundreds of years to the dawn of the Federation. Still interesting. New crew, new situations, new things happening. But to go back, and it's been such a mistake, and I understand they set the tone. Let's do Kirk, Spock, and McCoy again and again. So we're going to keep doing that again, and you're going to recast those same characters again? Why? Why are you doing that? You watched, it's such a weird thing to think that Leonard Nimoy's Spock, even in, he died in what was that, in Star Trek Beyond, because he went to the alternate universe and all that. It's such a weird thing to think that we watched William Shatner play Kirk canonically from 1966 to 1994 before he died. Almost 30 years. So we know Kirk's been around for 30 years as a fictional character, played by the same guy. And we watched him get old, and they incorporated that into his performance. So why? Why do it again? Why go back and, I don't know. Unless you can do it much better, then why bother? I don't know. Brian Knight, actually that was a Let's Get Physical Media letter, so I can't do that. Bill Quigley goes on to say, how to make comic book movies. Make comic book movies that are panel by panel from graphic novels so that the movie audience will be reading a graphic novel on the movie screen from beginning to end. Well, Bill, while an interesting idea, they kind of did that, by the way. They had motion comics. You can buy The Watchmen as a motion comic, and it's panel by panel recreation of the Watchmen comic, but there's sound and it moves, but you can do that. So they did that. Of course, it's a lot longer than just a movie. So yeah. Our favorite, The Science Lady, Tracy, writes, hi, Rob. After your latest rant, this article should interest you. You may not get all of it as it's from The New Scientist, but the bit you can read is still fascinating. I still have my fingers crossed I'm going to get to study AI and data science. It's needed. If not, then I'll be teaching in September. Take care and have a great weekend. Tracy. P.S. Forgot to tell you that I have a name for my channel. I can't use Science Lady. That was a temp name. This is a really interesting article, but I will read it on another time. But the article is actually from New Scientist, and it's from August 8th. From time crystals to wormholes. When is a quantum simulation real? Actually, you know what? I can read this article because it's not that long. This was written by Philip Ball, August 8th, 2023. When scientists reported that they had created a space-time wormhole in November of last year, the world's media were all over the story, even though they struggled to make sense of it. A journalist for the website Unilad put it neatly when they wrote, so, you might have to bear with us here a bit because it's all very complicated and new. As far as many observers could see, physicist Maria Spiropoulou, I think, at the California Institute of Technology and her colleagues had in fact merely used a quantum computer to simulate a wormhole. Good luck flying a spaceship through that. What confused matters was that the team insisted the work amounted to more than just a simulation. The quantum computation, the researchers said, was fully equivalent to the creation of a wormhole. If you find that hard to swallow, you aren't alone. Ask other physicists about Spiropoulou's claims, and you tend to get a lot of long pauses, chin-stroking, and disagreement. It seems there is a genuine confusion about if and when a quantum computation can create real entities or just simulate them. The putative wormhole isn't the only thing said to have been conjured up by quantum computers recently. There is also the alluringly named time crystal, as well as strange particles called nonabellions, touted as the ideal ingredient for next-generation quantum computers. But whether these amount to instances of true creation or not is a question that takes us into deep waters. It is a new twist on the riddle that has haunted physics since the quantum mechanics was devised in the early 20th century. What is, in fact, real? Well, I don't subscribe to the New Scientist, so that's all I can read you. But what I can do is drop this article into the chat, and you can find it and read more of it yourself. So there it is. I put it in the chat. Very interesting, very intriguing. We shall see what happens there. Hopefully, whatever happens, it'll be good, and it won't be bad. So thanks, Science Lady, for that. Thank you, Tracy, for that. Interesting stuff. AI versus VI. This comes from Alberta J. Hi, Rob. I enjoyed Robservations today. I thought, given the topic, I would draw your attention to the following article. It kind of gets to the heart of what you were discussing with AI. You probably know this, of course, but I think it's a primer many more need to read. In my opinion, I think it does us all a disservice to call what we have today AI. I wish people would quit using the term AI because we don't have AI, not really. What we have today is VI systems. AI may come, but it is not here today. Well, I would normally, maybe I'll save this for another Robservations, but again, I'm going to put this in the chat so people can read the article that you were talking about. So there it is, and I want to thank you for sending that in. Maybe I will. Science Lady has written us again. Tracy has written us again. Hi, Rob. I just wanted to let you know I've sorted out names for my channel and podcast. My channel is going to be called A World in Pajamas. That's for YouTube and everything else. A World in Pajamas. What I'm doing is just a hobby. I thought the name was appropriate. After working, I just want to sit at home with no makeup on, wear comfy clothes, and just chill. I'm going to do programs that are audio related. I may expand later to talk about other things not related to science. Who knows? Maybe something about I, Claudius. I'll bring you on for that episode. Haha, I missed John Hurt. Well, as we all know, John Hurt was killed by an alien xenomorph erupting from his chest, or perhaps it was a Gorn. Who knows? The writers don't. Anyway, as I said earlier, I'm going to be very busy with things, so take care. Well, Tracy, you're always welcome around these parts, and I hope if I come to the UK, I will get to break bread and share a drink with you. This one comes from our friend David Miller. Fancy fans choose fandom. Hi, Rob. I was thinking the other day about how we as fans choose our genre properties and make them personal to us. How does that process play out? To give an example, when the first season of Invincible came out, I loved it. And when that final episode dropped, I watched it multiple times that month. But I really haven't gone back to it since. So, what does it take to make one a fan of something? Clearly, a lot of factors come into play here. Quality, I hope, is a big one. Also, if it becomes part of your personal zeitgeist. But another critical factor, like the third leg of a tripod, is how old you were when you encountered the property. A lot of the time, when we treasure a certain sci-fi, fantasy, or horror IP, it's not just an intellectual appreciation, it's also a comforting experience. Because watching it, on a gut level, brings us back to those simpler times of youth, when your whole life was ahead of you and you had nothing but options. No matter how good Invincible is, it will not be a transporting experience for me. Rewatching the original Star Trek is comforting because watching Spock deal with his familial politics at the time made it easier for me to deal with my own familial dysfunctions. Watching All That Jazz, by the way, one of my favorite films of all time, brings me back to my post-college life, taking those first stumbling steps through love, work, and adulthood. Rent lets me relive days living in Alphabet City in New York's Lower East Side, breaking into the comics industry. And these days, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory reminds me that life can still be magical and hopeful, and that you can still make discoveries and have adventures. In essence, it was the Harry Potter of the 1970s. Oh, Roald Dahl was the J.K. Rowling of the 70s, for me at least. All of his books. And if these genres were introduced to you by a family member or a beloved friend, it becomes a celebration of those human bonds. Now, at this point, I'm sure you could say, but Dave, The Wild Wild West was as omnipresent in your formative years as Star Trek, but I don't see you waxing nostalgic over Artemis Gordon. But you could be. True. Clearly, this little theory of mine isn't the last word on the subject, and I'd really like to hear what you and the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity think of this theory. With that, Rob, I want to thank you for the great content you bring to the interwebs, and I look forward to the Burnettwork turning into a CBS-type behemoth. Ta-ta, or talked, what, TTFN. Ta-ta for now. Dave. Dave, that's a great letter. Thank you. I totally agree with you. I think that, like, for me, Star Trek was when I was 5 years old. You know, Planet of the Apes, Star Wars when I was 10. I mean, these things that because they're things that they're aspirational. You want to grow up and have some of those things that you love imbued in you. You know, I was too old for things like Transformers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but it's the same kind of thing. I mean, I just wish that, you know, it was never cartoons for me. It was always, at 5 years old, it was the Twilight Zone. It was the Twilight Zone. It was the Outer Limits. Actually, it was Twilight Zone, Star Trek, and Outer Limits. That was what shaped my childhood. And then the movies, the Planet of the Apes franchise, and then all the sci-fi movies I'd watch on Sci-Fi Theater on Channel 11 at 2 o'clock on Sundays. So, yeah. Okay, here we got one from Samuel Hall. The merits of New Trek. Hi, Rob. I've been a fan of yours for some years, loving what you do on Robservations, and love your Star Trek rants. I just wanted to write you a quick letter to discuss some merits of New Trek. Being a kid of the 90s, I remember watching TNG and DS9, but I was never really into it. There was only 5 channels, and it was something to have on in the background. I couldn't tell you anything about the characters or the plots. It was all just some sci-fi to have on while I did other things. I was always a Star Wars kid, and I still am today. However, that all changed when Star Trek 09 came out. I went to the cinema to watch it. I was blown away. From that point on, I wanted to go deep into Trek, and that's what I did. I bought the Blu-ray box set of TOS. I was 18 at the time and working on a job from hell, but the little time I had off work, that box set was a great comfort. I fell in love with the show. From there, I went on to watch all the shows and movies, TNG being my favorite. Many years on, I consider myself a Trekkie, recently solidifying my fandom with a ton of the Exo 6 6-scale figures. At the time of writing, Locutus is out for delivery, and I am buzzing, and what a great figure it is. I do agree with your views on New Trek, the writing, the use of beloved characters, etc., but I can watch it and find things to enjoy. I hate watching Michael Burnham and Paul Stamets, but I really do enjoy Saru and Georgiou. I'm a fan of Lower Decks, and for the most part, I really enjoy Strange New Worlds, but like you, I get pissed off with what they do with Spock and the constant need for member berries that break canon. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that old Trek is supreme. However, while Star Trek could and should be treated better, for me it's better to have New Trek than no New Trek at all. Without it, I wouldn't have been brought to a franchise I love very much. I hope this letter finds you well. All the best, Sam. Well, Sam, I'll tell you what. I totally agree with you, and I want to be clear about this. As much as I rail about modern Star Trek 09 was Sam's first entry into the franchise. Star Trek doesn't need me to speak for it. Star Trek speaks for itself. There's a reason why the original series resonated the way it did. Star Trek as we know it, classic Star Trek. I mean, now it's really interesting because I really do feel a lot of people who have come to the franchise because of modern stuff go back and watch TOS and like, what's the fuss all about? And they can't get past the time it was made. And I don't blame them. Modern audiences are not, look, this is not a slight to modern audiences. It's very difficult when you've grown up in a world, and I've said this a million times, that Jurassic Park already exists, to go back and watch the stop motion work of Ray Harryhausen or Willis O'Brien and get past it. Because you already grew up in a world with photorealistic dinosaurs. It's very, very difficult to go back further and watch The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms or Valley of the Gwangi and not laugh at it. I totally understand that. And if you've been watching modern Star Trek with all of its production values and you came to Star Trek in 2009, I get it. I understand. But Star Trek speaks for itself. It doesn't need me to speak for the franchise. And there's a reason why it's resonated and we're still talking about it 57 years later. The original series stands on its own storytelling, and it always will. And if you're open up to it, it's self-evident. Just like truth. Truth is not relative. Truth is truth. And the greatness of the original series is something that has endured for a very long time. And audiences that like Star Trek 09, this is why I've always said the first Star Trek a lot of people see, unfortunately, is going to be Discovery or Strange New Worlds or Lower Decks or Prodigy or whatever else comes along. And I don't begrudge them that, because Star Trek speaks for itself. You'll go back and you'll discover the joys of Deep Space Nine and TNG in the original series. Or maybe you won't. But the thing is, everyone has the Star Trek that leads them to discover more of the franchise, and I will never take that away from anybody. As much as people want to call me a gatekeeper. Look, I'm critical of Star Trek the way I'm critical of a lot of things. I just happen to like Star Trek more than anything else. So there you go. But that's a great letter, and I want to thank you for writing in. Tony Washburn writes, Destiny Captain here. Rob, in Robservations 876, someone in the chat mentioned that Stargate SG-1, the first Stargate series, there's a fourth wall-breaking episode. This is true, and you should absolutely watch it. However, like almost all of Stargate, as led by Brad Wright, it's intelligent and well-written. It's a wry commentary on Hollywood and the TV business at the time. It seems even more poignant today. By the way, I did not know this. We are talking about episode 200. It was made in 2006. It's a 10th season episode. You absolutely need to skip ahead and watch it. It will not hamper your journey through the rest of the series run. Spoilers ahead. In this episode, a TV producer is granted permission to brainstorm with the current iteration of the SG-1 team on an upcoming movie reboot of the popular in-universe Wormhole Extreme TV series. These plot points pick up from prior episodes in the Stargate TV series, but will not impact on your enjoyment of this story. This episode features several outright parodies of a number of sci-fi series, including TOS TNG, and it does so respectfully. It also pokes fun at networks, studios, reboots, bad continuity, bad science fiction, and over-the-top action and dramatics, and terrible writing. Also, there must be no Stargate revival without Brad Wright. He has been the heart of Stargate for decades. Well, you know what? I have to tell you, this is the first I've heard of this. And I'm going to watch it, Tony, just because you told me to. That sounds really, really good. I'm in. Count me in. I love it. Now, let's see. Where was I? I don't know. I'm going to find out. Let's see where I was. I was with Irene Jobson. Back to your super chats. Word Balloon. John Suntress from the Word Balloon podcast says, compare Riker's stoic Mr. Worf, fire, to Pike's indecision panic look. Why must they make Pike so weak? It's very frustrating to see this emasculation. I agree with you. I thought that was terrible writing. Henry Alonzo Myers, you don't give your star at least some heroic thing to say on a cliffhanger. You just have him stand there and look scared. I don't know. Will Johnson Sasso says, Rob, I love your Star Trek takes. What were your thoughts on Secret Invasion? I was pretty disappointed by the end, and that finale was bizarre. Thanks. Well, I read the scripts for Secret Invasion. I thought they were much better. They were basically from 2 years ago, too. They were pretty rewritten. I thought it was pretty underwhelming. I understand they wanted to make it a personal story with Nick Fury, but when you're doing something that big where the world is at stake, it just seemed a little limited in what they were trying to do. I was disappointed in the execution, and I thought the direction was rather flat. So, a misfire from me, but I did like some of it. But it wasn't great. Chemist said, oh, that is literally all the good things combined. I wish my local Video on Us would have been a 10th the curator. I dare say tastemaker you were. Well, Chemist, I did try. That was, and people came back and they would ask you, I mean, when you had, okay, let me explain something. This is hard to explain for people When I worked in 1980 at a video store, there weren't any. I literally worked at the second video store in the United States, which was Video Space, that was started by Weston Nishimura, who started the VSDA, the Video Software Dealers Association of America. There was Video Station. There's probably video stores in New York or something, but Video Station, Andre Blaze Video Station, and Weston Nishimura's Video Space, it was like the second video store in the nation. So the people that walked in there in 1980, VCRs were brand new. Most people couldn't afford them. And the people that could, to be able to take home a movie was such a novelty that it was a very different time. And I was a 13-year-old kid, 14, 15, 16, giving movies to adults that could afford a VCR. So I had to up my game. And it was an interesting time. So, and I tried to do my best. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I only do the meme as a joke and not to be mean to you. I guess this is something going on in the chat. Thomas Logan says, Dieter Bastian, Star Trek Maximum, opens with Kirk Paul Wesley announcing he's trans and Captain Maya Burnett, Cynthia Rothrock, congratulating her. Hey, I'd watch that. I'd be in. I'd be in, Thomas Logan. I'm in. Dan Candy says, Rob, any chance of you ever getting Berman-era writers or the Akutas as guests on here? I'd love to hear what they think about modern Trek. Probably. I mean, if you really... here's the thing. You're not going to get the Star Trek family, and I agree with this. You're not going to get the Star Trek family to ridicule or criticize other Star Trek writers and Star Trek family members. And nor would I want them to. You know, like, I'm really proud of the work I did on Star Trek Picard Season 3, interviewing the writers and working with Bill Hunt on our Kurlan Naskos after show. I really like doing that, and I want to thank Terry Metalis for coming on along with actors like Todd Stashwick and Christopher Monfett, you know, the other members of the writing staff, because, you know, they're not going to do that. And I wouldn't ask them to do that. Look, I'd love to do it off the record, and I have done it off the record. But everybody who's worked on Star Trek kind of joins a fraternity, and there is a camaraderie that's developed there. And I wouldn't want to have other. To me, as much as I'm critical of Star Trek, I would never want, from a professional standpoint, I'm happy to criticize writers. I'm happy to criticize things I don't like. I did it in print in Sci-Fi Universe magazine. You know, I've told Brandon Braga to his face, even back in the day, if I didn't like something. I'm nothing if not honest. But I would never want to bring someone on my show and have them criticize other writers that work in the same field. It's just uncouth. And I wouldn't do it. If I bring writers on, and I interviewed a lot of the writers, Renee Echevarria, Ron Moore, Brannon, you know, when we were doing the Next Generation documentaries, there's many, many hours of those interviews. You can watch them. I'm really proud of that stuff. But I would, and especially the Akutas. I mean, the Akutas are very nice and they're very politically savvy, but they're not ever, the Akutas are not ever going to, in a public forum, say anything bad, nor should they. And I respect them for it. However, if you can find their encyclopedia, which is out of print, I'd buy it because it's dope. And if you want to delve into true Star Trek canon, it's all right here. Oops. I opened a model before the show. 200 Watt Studio says, would like to hear your thoughts on the Babylon 5 film from a storytelling aspect, especially. I love what they did. Well, I can't wait to see it. I'm getting it this week. So hopefully I will. I'm really excited. So I'm going to get it. Joe Panora says, I binged 12 Monkeys 2 weeks ago. It was great. I love documentaries. Ever watched Sour Grapes? It was nuts. I have not watched Sour Grapes. I would like to watch Sour Grapes. I have not watched it. Garfield's Bizarre Adventure says, my biggest problem is writers and showrunners trying to change or ignore the fundamental lore of shows and movies. Only a matter of time before they add magic wands and flying brooms to Starfleet. Well, they kind of have in Discovery with things like the Spore Drive, which I don't understand. I mean, you know, if you want, I would think that writers would want to, like, look, the best comic book, look no further than comic books. I mean, if you want to, I know a lot of people, comic books are a little different. Like when Hickman came in and wrote House of X and Powers of 10, he totally changed the X-Men. I loved it because I've been reading the same goddamn X-Men stories for 40 years. I did not need to see another X-Men story like that. They needed to do that. The characters were the same. The situations completely changed. I loved it. But I think when you take over a long-running franchise, what I want is somebody to extrapolate what it would actually be like in universe. I mean, going back and telling stories of Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scotty and Uhura today seems odd because they were creations of a different time. So whatever you're going to do today is going to not feel the same. That's why create your own characters. And they can be better reflective of the time we're in now, still using Star Trek as a framework. I hate that, the way they do it now. Kellraiser says, totally agree, ageism is very real with today's younger generations. They defend what is important to them by calling older people condescending nicknames. Oh, the hypocrisy. Oh, it's incredible. I mean, what was interesting, when I was young, I loved people that were older that were making the things that I made. I mean, it's bizarre to me. But then again, I think it speaks to a larger issue. I think there's a fundamental lack of respect in our civilization, not just of young people for older people, although that's there, but for everybody. Nobody respects anyone, and it's sad to see, and I don't dig it. 200-Watt Studio says the point of Best of Both Worlds 1 was that Riker deciding to kill his friend and also his soul. It was about character, the Kobayashi Maru, if you will, a no-win scenario. I totally agree with that. 100%. 100%. But also, you still had him also taking over the center seat. It was foisted upon him, but he had to step up in the worst possible moment, and he did. Stephen Langford says, would you buy a hot toy of the parody version of Biggs Darklighter? Yes, that version. Wink, wink. Also, where's the hot toy of the Cape Canaveral reporter? Some people want to hold you in their hands. Laugh out loud. Thanks, Rob. Well, you're welcome to do so. What Stephen's referring to is 2 roles I played. Yes, I played Biggs Darklighter and Star Wars XXX. And no, I'm not kidding. I flew in the Battle of the Death Star in that porn film. I don't have the cock for porn, unfortunately. I wish I did, but I don't. It's all right. Still works. It's all good, but it could be better. Although that's how come I'm such a cunning linguist. But anyway, and the Cape Canaveral reporter, or as I like to call him, Ross Campbell, is the character I played in Superman Returns that you see for just a split second, but you hear my voice before Superman leaves to save the space shuttle. Hey, I'd love it if somebody made that. I would love that. Scott Bartholomew says, I'm ready for another Otoy offering. And Otoy is the company that's done these really interesting, cool shorts that are on the internet, on YouTube, where they're recreating Star Trek the Motion Picture versions of Spock and Yeoman Colt from the original version of The Cage, which she's mysteriously missing from Strange New Worlds along with Dr. Boyce, which is strange to me. Why bother? But they did. I get it. Original characters that they could have really gone in on, but they didn't. I know why, but hey, still strange. But I did do a Robservations on Otoy, so check it out. Go back and look at that if you want. Chemist says, I feel like AI has always been about predictive models, and we're getting better and better predictive models. I'm always open to learning more. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about AI. We don't have real intelligence yet. Kurzweil's singularity is not yet upon us. So there is no real artificial intelligence yet. It is all predictive models. Scott Bartholomew says, an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. For those of you who don't know, the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge was actually, I believe it's a French short film that was picked up by the Twilight Zone and aired as a Twilight Zone episode, although it wasn't actually made for the Twilight Zone. If you watch it, it's about a civil war. It's about a war. I don't know if it's a Confederate, somebody in the Civil War. Is it somebody in the Civil War? A man is being hung off a bridge, and he's done a bad thing. And the rope snaps, and he falls into the river and he's able to escape. That's all you should know. But when you've watched the whole thing, you realize, like, oh my God, this was the basis for this and this and this and this and this and this. Yes, it was. An occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is great. And Rod Serling's narration at the beginning is really great, too, because he talks about that. Anonymous sends in a tip. Don't like, don't watch. If it wasn't mentioned in this or other streams around optimistic, hopeful of a betterment by complaint versus a pessimistic person would say, fuck it, who cares, let it burn, and thanks for your elegant streams. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I still watch. I want Star Trek to be great. The fact that it hasn't been great for me since 2009 doesn't mean I'm going to give up on it. I just feel that we're in a time now when the Star Trek franchise, for whatever reason, since everybody who has controlled it and taken it over has been trying to turn it into something else. They've been trying to update it, make it here for modern audiences, which is interesting to me because, you know, if you look at The Expanse, if you want to update what Star Trek is, look no further than The Expanse. I mean, The Expanse does things like what I found cool about The Expanse is let's extrapolate what human beings are going to be like 200 years from now. If we conquer the solar system, human beings are going to be mostly, I would imagine, in 200 or 300 years of mixed race descent. Because once we're truly a global species, and I don't mean globalist, I mean once people can travel all over the place, and, you know, we haven't done a lot of traveling. A lot of Americans haven't traveled. Like 65% of Americans don't even have a passport. But once we start traveling more and more and more, people are going to be falling in love with people all over the world, and you're going to see a lot more intermarriages and a lot more mixed race kids. And I actually believe that that's probably the destiny of humanity, is that eventually as we move out into the cosmos, as we become a more of a when we start leaving the planet, we're going to have the Earth is going to have whatever the dominant genetics is going to, you know, if we're going to survive in the cosmos, that's what's going to happen. And I thought that was really interesting that if you watch The Expanse, there was a lot of people that have mixed ethnic backgrounds. And I thought that was a really great touch because that was them saying this is what the future is going to be like. And I believe, yes, in fact, it will be like that. As more and more people get to know one another and travel around the world and fall in love. And I really do believe that. And I thought that was a really nice touch. And that's another thing that I think Star Trek is not doing a great job. When Star Trek makes interpersonal relationships feel like they're happening today, it's a failure of imagination. You have to extrapolate from today, what would the future be like 300 years from now? What were humans like 300 years ago? That should always be on your mind. When you're writing characters 300 years in the future, you have to think back, what were characters like 300 years in the past? What were they like? And how are we going to change as people 300 years from now? How are we going to be different? Star Trek is utterly failing us. It's more contemporary than ever before. And that to me, not a lot of imagination going on there. 200 Watt Studio says Stargate SG-1 is a terrific sci-fi television show. Weekly morality plays like Trek in a military base. Military, but explorers. And he's right. Episode 200 is fantastic. I'm going to go watch it. Can't wait. Yeah, I've watched the first season of Stargate. I hadn't seen any of it. I was a total blind, and I really enjoyed the first season of Stargate. I was surprised at how much I did enjoy it. I liked it. I do have, Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, who created Stargate, have nothing to do. I mean, you talk about you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. They didn't make any money off that series. They created Stargate, and they made bupkis, which is a bummer. I mean, they made stuff off the original film, but they made nothing off those TV shows. Sonny Squirts Dominguez says, feeling like Rowdy Roddy Piper seeing things friends are blinded to see in our current political and social landscapes. They Live will be out next month at the AMC, September 3rd and 6th via Fathom Events. Other movies or TV you recommend that show how the public is fed a lie? Well, I love conspiracy thrillers. I mean, They Live is one of the most obvious ones. But things like The Parallax View. I love The Parallax View was something that they was heavily influential to the X-Files. It's a Warren Beatty movie, Alan Pakula movie. Check that out. Talk about scary politics, or The Manchurian Candidate. But there's nothing quite like They Live about how, there's nothing like aliens duping Earthlings and setting stuff up like that. But Tom Jr. Jackson said, the old man meme, Rob. That's what I mean. Oh, yeah. That gets it's so funny. I wish I could go back through my social media and collect every person that sent me the old man shouts at clouds meme and just do a montage. Of course, that might be mean. Scott Bartholomew says, I encourage all who like the TOS episodes to get the James Blish adaptations. They're really, really good. Really interesting. I totally agree. James Blish, he novelized all the original series episodes. And then after posthumously, a book, Mudd's Angels, that was completed by his wife, was released with the Harry Mudd stories, and then a new Harry Mudd story. So check that out. RRTNZ says, bulletproof vests wear Chuck Norris for protection. You can rant about New Trek 1,000 times more eloquently than it is written. Never change. Cheers. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. That's very nice. Scott Bartholomew says, New Trek's downfall has been the incorporation of today's socioeconomic BS instead of imagining the future. Oh, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's a bummer. It's a failure of imagination. Have another letter from Science Lady. She says, very sorry for another email. I meant to send you this with the previous letter. Also, I might not be in touch for a while, as I've got a lot going on. Plus, we want to get the podcast finished. In the UK, if you don't know, we have something called Ofcom, which oversees complaints from viewers who may think we have something called Ofcom, OFCOM, which oversees complaints from viewers who may think a TV show breaks broadcasting rules. I'm tired on my phone, just about to get into bed, and I'm probably not wording this message well, but I hope it's understandable. Apologies. So what the politicians are hoping to do, as in other European countries, is to extend the committee's boundaries to streaming platforms such as YouTube. I'm in the middle, and I can see benefits to both. YouTube is a great place for indie art. You can come from any background and make a program. I like that. It should be saved. However, I also see other dangers such as grooming and hate crimes. If it goes ahead, which streaming platforms are going nuts over, understandably, I'm sort of meh. I don't care really, because TV in the UK is going back to I, Claudius to now, has always been liberal with nudity, swearing, etc. I don't think it will change the streaming process, whatever the outcome. They only investigate a program if viewer complains, and rarely do anything. But anyway, I thought you might like the information. I didn't know that. I hope you and the gang have a great week. Best wishes, Tracy. Well, thank you, Tracy. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't ever watched, pump up the volume. You are kind of like the Eat Me, Beat Me lady. I'm just saying. But yeah, I mean, look, it's weird as algorithms and our speech is being regulated. I mean, big tech, YouTube can go away in an instant. I have friends whose channels are being demonetized and they don't know why. I mean, it's amazing. You could make YouTube hundreds of thousands of dollars, literally. I mean, this channel has made YouTube, when you do super chats, YouTube takes 30% of those super chats. Tips, I get a better cut, which is good. But YouTube takes, and by the way, I believe in paying YouTube. YouTube is set up, this is a great global system. And it's free of charge. Anybody can use it free of charge. And I'm here creating content, and I really appreciate people supporting me. And we have this great discourse, and I appreciate that. But it seems unfair that I'm creating content and a lot of other people are creating content, and YouTube can come along. People can go after your channel, complain about you. You can take your channel down. There's people that have families that are doing YouTube to pay the bills. And they can get their livelihood taken away in an instant and not know. And I think that YouTube needs to be far more, like streamers do, far more transparent with the reasons. But the problem is there's nobody, things get taken down just by algorithms. So half the time, people at YouTube don't even know why your channel's taken down, and I think it's a bummer. I think it's a bummer. This one comes from Carlito Cool. Carlito Cool writes in and says, "Hi Rob, I recently caught on to your show, and it's great. Thanks. Next Gen was my jam in the 90s, and I've loved Star Trek ever since, including the original series. That said, I've accepted modern Trek is more interested in trying to please the masses with melodrama and fantastic effects than with asking wondrous questions and interrogating humanity. And that's fine. Old Trek has given me many hours of content to rewatch and appreciate in new ways because it's just that good. That said, can you recommend any non-Trek? In other words, works that are not of the Star Trek IP but carry the Star Trek spirit? Well, and then P.S. Your insight into the inner workings of Hollywood is top-notch, and your recent analysis of a possible Hollywood death spiral was your best. Thank you." That's very nice of you, Carlito Cool. Well, I would say that look, to me, a movie like Arrival, Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, could have been a perfect Star Trek episode. I think it's a great movie. Unfortunately, they changed the ending, but to me, it's a great first contact story. I think that Project Hail Mary, that Andy Weir, his book, the man who wrote The Martian, then he wrote a book called Artemis, but his third book, Project Hail Mary, I can't recommend that book highly enough. If you want to read an incredibly entertaining, very thought-provoking science fiction novel that goes down easy, Project Hail Mary is fantastic. That's very much in the Star Trek spirit. And going cold, if you don't know what Project Hail Mary is about, don't read anything about it. If you get the audiobook, don't read the description if you can. Just take it on my authority. RMB says Project Hail Mary. If you love it, it's so entertaining, it's so much fun, it's so uplifting. It'll thrill you, it'll scare you, it'll make you smile. It, to me, definitely has the Star Trek spirit. The same way I think The Martian, I love Ridley Scott's The Martian, especially the extended version. Very much the spirit of Star Trek. But there's not a lot. I mean, somebody brought up The Man from Earth that was actually written by Jerome Bixby. That came out in the aughts. That's a pretty interesting story. But there's a lot of really interesting science fiction movies that, it's a little avant-garde, but Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth just got re-released in 4K. If you've never seen that with David Bowie, that's an interesting, it's very different from Star Trek, but as far as a movie goes, it's an interesting look at what an alien might face coming to Earth. Stuff like that. But there's not a lot. Star Trek is pretty unique. Oh, and if you really want to be depressed, even though this is not very Star Trek, Aniara, the Swedish? Yeah, the Swedish science fiction movie. But man, ooh boy, is that a depressing one. But man, do I love that movie. I really do. I really love that movie. I think it's fantastic. Let's see. New Trek's downfall has been the incorporation of today's socioeconomic BS instead of imagining the future. Yeah, I think so too. Thomas Logan, he asked me this the other day, called Dave Parker. You know what was so weird? I called Dave Parker twice, and my phone was all messed up. It was shut off, and then I heard some weird, it would start out with a weird message that I never heard before, and it was shut off. Then I got up the next morning, I'm like, what was that all about? And it worked. Let's see if it'll happen today. I'll call Dave Parker since you asked, and I didn't do it, and I didn't get a hold of him. But I'll call him right now. Dave Parker, who I used to do Midnight Metal with. He might not be home, but I'm calling him anyway. Maybe he's watching the show. Hopefully the call will go through.
Hello.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Rob.
So I'm doing a live show right now. Thomas Logan says the ghost of George C. Scott says, call Dave Parker. So I'm calling you.
Hello.
Are
you on the air now?
I'm on the air right now.
Well, hi everyone. How are you?
Dave Parker is the director of The Hills Run Red, and you have a new movie out that you recently finished, Dr. Death.
A year ago, but yeah.
Well, still,
there we go.
It's on streaming services.
Hoo-wee!
Hey, well,
Yeah.
there you go. What are you up to right now?
I'm watching The Matrix Resurrection.
And had you seen it before?
I did when it first came out.
So did I. I like it.
I remember barely anything about it, so it's kind of like a first watch again.
Are you watching it on disc or streaming?
Just streaming.
Ah.
Sorry.
I enjoy it.
Sorry. I did get The Void on disc today, though.
Oh, you did? I like The Void.
The Void's kind of cool.
It is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Did you go walk the picket line with the Scream Queens today?
I didn't, and that was yesterday.
I mean, that's what I said yesterday.
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I had other stuff to do.
You are talking to over 500 people right now. There's 568 people.
Those unions have been so good to me, so,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Thomas Logan is going, yes, you called Dave Parker.
It's all coming apart, Rob. It's all coming apart.
It is.
Hollywood's crumbling.
Burn, Hollywood, burn. I'm going to go watch that movie. So, Dave, let me ask you this.
Yes.
Since I got you on the phone, there's a lot of great stuff. There's been a lot of great releases on physical media in terms of horror genre stuff.
Oh, I'll tell you one that I saw this weekend that's not on physical yet, but is going to be in September.
Oh, okay.
That was great.
Okay.
Cobweb.
Dude, you know what? Everyone's saying that, and I talked to one of the producers, and he was like, "Oh, it's not as good as it should have been."
No,
I'm like,
Roy Lee was a producer, and it's a shame the movie got completely thrown away, and it didn't deserve to at all.
Because Steve Barton was singing its praises too.
Yeah, so I mean that's the thing. Lionsgate put it out last month. The only shows around town were like at 10:30 at night, and it was one show for like a week, and then you couldn't find it anywhere. But yeah, it's from the director who did Marianne, that Netflix show.
Oh yeah,
which was really cool. So this is his first feature. If I'm correct, I think they shot in Bulgaria. If not, I do know that our makeup girl Yana, worked on this movie.
Yana Miro.
She did the makeup on. Yeah, she did the makeup on Cobweb as well. It's Lizzie Kaplan and Anthony Starr from The Boys, star in it. It's just really cool and creepy. It's got its own vibe. It's beautifully made, and it really, really works on the creep factor a lot.
Well, that's good.
And it's kind of unexpected and cool. I liked it better than Talk to Me.
Wow. Well, people are saying that. Well, listen.
It's really good. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, I'll let you get back to the Matrix Resurrections, okay. And I'm gonna go finish this show. But I appreciate the insight into Cobweb because people are talking about it and no one saw it.
Don't sleep on this one, guys. Cobweb. I'm telling you.
All right.
All right.
All right, dude.
Have a great night. Have a good rest of the show, and I will talk to you soon.
All right, dude. I'll see you later. Thanks for answering.
All right,
bye.
You got it. Bye.
All right, Thomas Logan. There you go. That's Dave Parker. He and I have been working together since 1993. One of my oldest friends in the business. And, of course, I produced The Hills Run Red that he directed. So there you go. Let's see. Scott Bartholomew says Moon is a great movie. Moon is a great movie. I think Moon's a terrific science fiction film, and yes, I have that on 4K. RRTNZ says, serious question, what are your top 5 TNG episodes and why? Oh my god. Well, top 5 TNG episodes. Well, first of all, my favorite TNG two-parter is not The Best of Both Worlds. My favorite TNG two-parter is Chain of Command Parts 1 and 2 with Captain Jellicoe and the There Are Four Lights. I love that. I think it's great. And, they're like everybody else. I mean, The Drumhead, obviously, is one of my great episodes, one of my favorite episodes. I love an episode people don't like very much. I mean, it's not they don't like it, they don't think about it. The 3rd season episode, The Survivors, with John Anderson. I destroyed all the Husnock everywhere. I love that. I think it's great. I love Yesterday's Enterprise, and I love Inner Light, and those episodes, but I love Sins of the Father when Worf is has to accept discommendation. I think that's a great episode. And of course, like All Good Things, and there's so many. But it's hard, and they change all the time. Aurora Uplink says, "This is delightful. I love Dave Parker. Sounds great." Well, yeah, I love Dave Parker too. I've known him forever. Matthew Stevenson says, "I can't watch new Trek. I've tried many times, but I find it unwatchable. Do you think old Trek will ever return, or do I have to accept that this is new Trek now?" You know what I'm convinced of? I think modern Star Trek is missing science fiction. I know that's a strange thing to say, but it's basically turned into Lower Decks is a workplace farce made for. It seems like Lower Decks is a show about people that watch Star Trek in the workplace. It doesn't, and while they've tried to tell some decent Star Trek shows, all it does is break the fourth wall. It's just a fourth wall breaking show. It's hard to deal with. Prodigy was actually not bad, but it's inherently, it's not really about humanity. It's hard to call it Star Trek. It was more of a Guardians. Again, they're trying to change Star Trek into something else. I think what Star Trek needs is science fiction. It needs more science fiction. It needs more interesting, heady science fiction concepts. Star Trek should be a science fiction action adventure allegory. That's what it should be. And it's missing the calling the Gorn sometimes monsters are just monsters. That isn't science fiction. That's horror, or call it what you want, or to me it's just bad writing. An alien race in Star Trek should never be reduced. Now you can say, like the neural parasites in the end of this first season in Operation Annihilate, that's an interesting creature life form, but they're not evil. Their intentions are monstrous, but it's an intelligence that we don't really understand. I mean, I want more science fiction in my Star Trek. And the problem is the people that are writing Star Trek are the least qualified. You want them to write interpersonal relationship stuff? You want to write Spock being lovelorn about Christine Chapel? Okay, you certainly have the writers to do it. What you don't have are science fiction writers. And that's what Star Trek was missing. Gene Kuhn, like we pointed out early in the show, wrote a movie about Ronald Reagan. The people that wrote the original series were novelists, playwrights, short story writers, some of the great fantasists of the mid-20th century. We don't have those writers. We have TV writers that have only worked in a certain kind of television, which is odd because we're going through a television renaissance, really. We've been going through one for 20 years. Star Trek should be the best. Star Trek now should be the best written science fiction action adventure allegory that's ever been on TV. The problem is the people writing it don't know science fiction. And they haven't known science fiction since 2009. All they know is the TV shows they've watched. They need to read a bunch of science fiction books. I could even give them Rob Burnett's list for the writers of Star Trek. But who knows? It's too bad. If they had some real science fiction writers, they might have something. But they don't. Star Trek needs science fiction. It doesn't have science fiction. That's the thing that will save modern Star Trek. And get rid of all the interpersonal stuff, on enough of this romance shipping bullshit. Don't take, that's from every other TV show. The thing is, every one of these shows that these people are writing, whether it's The Magicians or the Carrie Diaries, it's all the same shit. It's high school students or college students or people in their early 20s having interpersonal relationships. And they're all writing that. Strange New Worlds is just that. And everything comes secondary. What should come first is compelling science fiction. If they even know what it is, they don't. That's what will save modern Star Trek. Figure out how to write some good sci-fi. They should all go to sci-fi boot camp, because I'm not convinced they know, which is too bad. Thomas Logan says, Midnight Metal with DP with Dave Parker this Friday. Do it, Bobby. Maybe I will. You never know. It's up to Dave. Aurora Uplinks says, sometimes the Gorn, sometimes it's just hungry. It must feed. Well, it's true. It's true. There's another letter from Science Lady. Science Lady writes, Rob, this is not a great email to send you as it's about climate change. People complain about immigration, but we're going to see lots more in the future. To be honest, I think we all need to help each other. The News Agents are my favorite new podcast. If you can stream, it's the best to listen to. From Tracy. I have not listened to the New Agents, Tracy, but here you go. And I'm going to put that in. So there is that podcast. I don't know. And finally, Dan Candy says, can you sing Maiden Wine? No, I can't. I can't sing. I can't sing Maiden Wine. No. I mean, you know, I can't. I can't. Should I? No, I can't. That's funny. Well. I can't. No, I can't. I can't. You know what? I gotta work up to that. And on that note, everybody, I almost did it. I was almost going to do it. On that note, everyone, I am going to call this episode of Robservations. I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this show via Super Chats and tips. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank my great moderator, Tom Jr. Jackson. Oh, Scott Bartholomew wants to know the status of 10 and 20. I just got sidetracked because I realized I don't have the episode. I got to rip my Blu-rays. And I've written a script. I'm ready to go to edit it all. But hopefully I can get that done the next couple days. Or might be next week. So I've been so busy. For those of you who don't know, I'm finishing up another feature film called The White Devils, which we're planning our last second unit shoot. We're shooting some gore effects with Vincent Guastini. Vinny. So I've been working on that. There's so many things I've been working on, and it's a little and we've had visitors from France, relatives from France over the last week and a half. It's been crazy. It's been crazy. So hopefully I want to get that done. And once I've got the template out, I'll be able to crank out the episodes. So, but I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for writing letters. Remember, if you want to write me a letter, postgeeksingularity.com, right down there. Check it out. And there's new episodes. You know what? I really like to bring all of your attention to one of my favorite shows on the Burnettwork that I don't do. And that's DJ's Architects of Imagination. If you guys are video game fans and you want to hear about, I mean, he's talking to some of the greatest minds in video games. I'm stunned. I edit the podcast together. It's not very much editing, but I put his video streams together and put it up. But he's interviewing some really fascinating people. If you play video games, you're interested in the history of video games, Architects of Imagination is great. King Tanic's Otaku Experience is great. The stuff that is doing is great. Lana Ewan Reviews, as by design, has gone back to her channel. So I hope people like that and keep following her over on her channel. You never know when you might see her again. Or Alan Cinematic on the channel. Who knows? But it's all good. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to everybody, have a better day. And thanks to Tom Jr. Jackson, the hardest working moderator in show business. Hopefully I'll be back tomorrow. By the way, I'm on the John Campea podcast tomorrow. I know, crazy, right? And on that note, live long and prosper.